The deeper you dive into the Book of Mormon, the more amazing things you will find. Amazing, but not always faith promoting. Sometimes they're downright scary. Our guest tonight has made that deep dive and joins us to share some of his findings. That's the signpost up ahead. Your next stop, Mormonism Live.
All right. How you doing?
Good evening, everybody. Good evening, Mr. Reel. How are you?
I'm doing great. There was no applause that time. I did not hit the button. Sorry about that.
You know, I didn't even notice.
Yeah.
I didn't even notice. I was just rolling with it. How'd you
Well,
like that opening? Wasn't that guy great?
I love it. Little Twilight Zone there at the end again. I like it.
He sounded kind of like Rod Serling.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Not Rod Meldrum, not to be confused. Don't want folks doing that.
No, I think no one should confuse those two.
That's right.
Well, anyway, it's so wonderful to see you and welcome everybody out there to another episode of Mormonism Live. And we've got a great show tonight. But first, we have an important word, not from our sponsor, but from a friend of ours who is engaged in a good work. And we want to give her a chance to talk about it and maybe solicit some help from you. It's Lila Tuller, and here she is. Lila, how are you?
I'm good. I can't see you guys.
Well,
we
consider
see
yourself lucky.
Okay. As long as you can see me, I guess it doesn't matter. But I'd love to see you. Anyway, yes, I am here because you guys have been so gracious to let me borrow your platform tonight so that I can solicit some help from the listeners and viewers on my project. My project is writing a book about spiritual abuse. And I need people, any of you, who feel that you have been a victim of spiritual abuse. I would like to have your story for my book. You can be anonymous. You can have me use your name if you want to. You can even identify other people if you want to. But that's up to you entirely. But I would love to get a 1 to 2 page document typewritten sent to me at my email address, which I will give you in a moment. But before that, I wanted to define what spiritual abuse is so you know what this project is about. So it's going to be really quick here. Spiritual abuse is a form of psychological and emotional abuse that occurs within a religious or spiritual context. It involves the misuse of spiritual authority or power to control, manipulate, or exploit others. Religious leaders can carry out this type of abuse. Members of a spiritual community, or even within intimate relationships where one partner uses spiritual beliefs to dominate the other. The key characteristics are 1, manipulation and control. 2, exploitation. 3, shaming and guilt. 4, isolation. 5, undermining personal agency. 6, spiritual disillusionment. And the impact on victims is that they often suffer from long-lasting emotional and psychological harm, including anxiety, depression, loss of faith, and difficulty trusting others.
Lila?
Yes.
I've got to ask a question for clarification.
Yes.
Is that undermining free agency or is it undermining moral agency? Which is the problem?
Ask Elder Bednar.
Okay.
He would be able to tell you that for sure. I would say, in my opinion, is agency. Just agency. You be the judge. Do you feel like someone's taken your agency from you or made you feel obligated in some way or manipulated or controlled or threatened or punished if you don't? Those are all part of this. The abuse can lead to feelings of alienation, spiritual confusion, a profound sense of betrayal. And I feel like anyone who has been excommunicated for sure would be one of these people. Anyone who has felt controlled by a priesthood leader or a spouse who holds the priesthood, or even a female who uses shame and control and manipulation in a spiritual way against your partner or children. This could have happened in your home as a kid, could have happened in your ward, stake, from the leaders at the top or local leaders. So if you feel like
you're interested in LDS church related.
Yes, it doesn't have to be only LDS church, but I'm kind of focusing on that. In fact, was talking to Randy Bell about this, and he offered a title for my book, and he thought it should be Mormon Abuse Stories, which I thought that's pretty good. Or Mormon Trauma Stories is another good one instead of Mormon Stories,
Yes.
So, yeah. Anyway, I'm kind of leaning towards Mormonism, but if you were abused in another high demand fundamentalist religion, that would qualify as well. So
what is it that compels you to do this? Why are you writing this book?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's something that I've been thinking about for a while. And I think what spurred it on was a conversation I had with Paul Toscano a couple of months ago. He was a good friend of my family, spent a lot of time at my home when I was growing up. He was a good friend of my dad's, my brother's. And I remember just a couple of months ago, talking to him, he said, your whole family were victims of spiritual abuse. And I hadn't really heard that title before, or that phrase. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, you were abused spiritually. You were manipulated spiritually. They used your belief in God to make you feel like shame and guilt, and that you needed to behave a certain way, or go through certain steps, or do certain things, or live a certain way. And if you didn't, you would be shamed for that. And another thing is, we were never taught boundaries at all. In fact, we were told not to have boundaries. You didn't draw boundaries. You always deferred your autonomy and your power and your guidance to a higher authority, always. So these are things that now they're buzzwords now, and we know better, but the church hasn't figured it out yet. And they're continuing to manipulate and control people spiritually, teaching us not to have boundaries. So these are things that they're butting up against the cultural milieu that we live in, where we know better now. And so that's why I wanted to write the book, because I wanted to bring our stories to the forefront and help everybody see what's happened.
How are you planning How are you planning on using the stories that you receive in your book?
I'm going to use them as examples of spiritual abuse, actual case studies.
So you're not going to be rewording them very much, or
not much. I mean, if I need to edit a little bit, I mostly want it to be in the voice of the person. So some people have sent me actual, it written out in story form. Other people have done bullet points. It's really just kind of how you want to word it, what happened to you, and what you feel qualifies for this. And like I said, I will respect your anonymity 100%.
And the purpose of your book, as you see it?
I want to put it out there, not just for members of the church, but for everyone, anyone who's interested in spiritual abuse, or who's just curious about it, to learn more about what it is and why it's caused so much trauma.
Is it this idea that was a revelation to you, as you described it, understanding all of a sudden that all these things that you've been through, right, and experience on a regular basis, as pretty much all Mormons have,
yes,
that can be accurately described as spiritual abuse?
Yes. Yeah, I feel like it was. I feel like you said, whatever happened to us, all of us, I would say pretty much anybody who's a member of the church, unless you somehow came through unscathed, have been through this. So it's just a matter of distilling our thoughts and bringing them to a point where we can write them down, to share them, so that we can all feel. It's like bearing your testimony, only it's about the trauma. I think it's helpful.
It's about something that's real.
What's
Which is a
that?
rude way of putting it. I said it's about something that's real. You're bearing your testimony about something that's real now.
Yeah, something that's real.
Lila, tell us one more time how folks can send that information to you.
Okay. My email address is Lila, Lila, as in rector, T as in Tuller, designs with an S, Lila RT designs at yahoo.com. Send it to me whenever you can get it pulled together. I'm moving on this. I'm not going to be sitting around collecting a lot of dust on it. So as soon as you can pull something together, I'll be collecting for about a month.
On the screen, is that correct? Do you see the screen there?
No, I can't see the screen. I
That's
need to
okay.
get
So
rid of
Does it make any difference?
RT designs at yahoo.com.
Lila RT designs at yahoo.com.
Does it make any difference if there's capitals in there?
I don't think so. No,
Okay.
it's not case sensitive.
All right. Well, great. I wish you all the luck with this wonderful project, Lila. Thank you for coming
Thank
on
you.
and telling
And
us about it.
it applies to all the, you and Bill and Ganesh as well. Like if you want to share, I would love to have your stories. So
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you.
yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
You
Have a great
bet. Have a great night.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. And now, this guest who's now coming back from his deep sea dive into the Book of Mormon, Ganesh Cherian. How are you doing?
Fabulous. Lovely to be with you guys tonight.
It's Wednesday where I am, but I think it's Thursday where you are.
That's correct. I live in the future in Wellington, New Zealand, which is currently Thursday at 2:30 p.m.
What happens tomorrow?
Oh, look, it's a bright day. It's the sun is shining outside, and it's summer. I don't know if it's summer where you are, but it's definitely summer where I am.
Well, who won the ball game last night? That's what I want to know.
I think I have no idea.
How is it that no one's thought of this before, Bill?
I know,
We'll make
right?
millions.
Who wins the Super Bowl?
I'm so sorry, Ganesh. You're down in New Zealand, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
All right. Well, it's wonderful to have you here. By the way, could you give our audience just the briefest of introductions of yourself?
Sure. I grew up in Wellington, New Zealand. I'm a former bishop like Bill, and I have been immersed in Mormonism for a long, long time. I went to Church College, which was a church high school in New Zealand. And then I served my mission also in New Zealand. And then I was a bishop in Wellington, which is a prominent, it's the capital city of New Zealand. So I in my time in the church, I've been able to connect with a number of members of the church across the country, but also across the world, because Wellington is the capital. We end up having a lot of people here for government positions, university positions, and also movie positions, which means that we get a number of members from the states, particularly, who come and spend time in our ward.
Well, that's wonderful. I noticed that the way the layout is that Bill and I are appropriately enough on the top of the screen in the Northern Hemisphere. And there you are down there in the Southern Hemisphere, where it's all warm and it's summer, I understand.
That's absolutely correct. Yes.
We just need to find out if it's next summer or last summer, and then we'll make some money. Okay. All right. No, tell us about what it is you've been discovering. Now, how many times have you read the Book of Mormon, sir?
Oh gosh, several dozen, I think, during the course of my life.
When you say several, what do you mean?
Oh, look, you read it through seminary, you read it, at home, you read it during gospel doctrine. I think that if you've been a member of the church for any length of time, you've gone through the Book of Mormon in various ways and think you know it quite well. Most members of the church, I would think, would feel like they have a intimate understanding of the Book of Mormon.
I think 7% tops, but go ahead.
Yeah. Foundation of our.
Most of them haven't read it,
That's right.
I mean, it's true.
Yeah. And of course, as a missionary, you highlight the bits that you absolutely want these new investigators to have a look at and feel incredibly impassioned and inspired by, so that they will, enter the waters of baptism. So you spend a lot of time trying to find the gems and highlight them to the people that you're connecting with.
Right. So have you been recently engaged in a fresh study?
Yes. Well, of course, as you look at the church differently, and particularly when, for me, looking at the Book of Mormon differently came with our William Davis's work, Visions in a Seer Stone, and looking at the Book of Mormon as performance, and particularly their idea of, yes, there's the.
Is this what you wanted?
Yes, I borrowed that particular slide off Dan Vogel. I think it was in one of his presentations. But William Davis does a incredible job looking at the Book of Mormon in a completely different way, and looking at it as a piece of performance by Joseph Smith as he presented it. And so one of the things I wanted to do, looking at Come Follow Me last year, was going through the Book of Mormon and thinking, okay, if this is Joseph and he's performing it, what is it that he's doing? Who is there in front of him? What's his motivation? What are the things that he's drawing on? And how is he managing to create this? And so, going through each page of the Book of Mormon and looking at that in terms of its environment, Joseph Smith's information, who he's connected with, gives you some insights into what's actually happening in the text and why it's happening and what ends up being there as a result.
And it ends up meaning the Book of Mormon's true, right?
That's absolutely the case. How did you know that?
You
That's
may
a spoiler.
What is this we have here on the screen?
So I thought this is just an overview of what I'm going to discuss today that I think is useful, and chime in with your ideas. So I just wanted to cover a few things. There are a number of insights that I gained. I actually did a podcast with Mormonish on some of the missing parts of the Book of Mormon, which were quite fascinating. But these are a couple that I think are really significant. First off is some of the composition clues that we have. How is the Book of Mormon organized? How can we tell that Joseph is creating it? And then I want to talk about some new autobiographical material that that I think that is really important in the Book of Mormon.
That would be Joseph Smith putting elements of himself into the text? That's
correct. I mean, and some of the most well-known ones, of course, are Nephi and Lehi, and then, of course, Mormon as well later on. Those characters really are Joseph, and he's describing his life. But there are a number of new ones that I think that we can see, particularly through the Book of Mosiah, that give us an insight into what he's thinking and feeling, and where he's drawing his source, his content. And then we'll look at 19th century dependency on the Bible and his environment, which you guys have covered quite extensively in the last few weeks, particularly with Brent Metcalf, and last week looking at Terrell Givens and his stuff. So
Terrell, have we heard from Terrell about that episode, Bill?
Terrell hasn't said a word
because he hasn't contacted me.
He hasn't asked to clarify his beliefs or anything. No, I'd be happy to have Terrell Givens on. It'd be a pleasure.
I was just wondering if you had any response.
None that I know of.
Okay. All right. Just checking. I'm sorry. I interrupted you, Ganesh. Please continue. I apologize.
That's fine. That's fine. And then the last thing that I wanted to cover was just some fun things. And one of them is the multiple endings of the Book of Mormon, that Joseph tried to finish several times. And, understanding that, and it gives us an understanding of what's going on in the background of this composition. And
well, the why is going to be what I'm going to be really interested in hearing what you have to say, because certainly it's been noticed before that there are multiple endings to the Book of Mormon, right? Apologists will look at it as, well, this is an evidence that it's really true. We thought it was going to end, but we were wrong. and now we got to go a little bit further. We think we're going to end, but no, we're wrong. Then there's more, and that is more consistent with an actual record being written than it is for an author who knows the end from the beginning, presumably, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And I think this really dovetails into the stuff that you did with Brent, because this is about Mosiah priority and understanding how Joseph is tacking on as he goes because the situation is changing.
Very good. All right, so let me find the slide thing, because this falls to me to change the slides. We've done this slide from the book Visions in a Seer Stone. Did you want to go to it again?
Yes, so just have a look at some of the things that we're going to talk about, because and it's worthwhile reading that statement. Do you want to read that for us, Bill?
Yeah, I'd love to. So, abundant evidence throughout the work indicates that Smith made use of several techniques that facilitated the process of oral composition, including such methods as the semi-extemporaneous amplification of skeletal narrative outlines, the use of formulaic language in biblical and pseudo-biblical registers, rhetorical devices common in oral traditions, and various forms of repetition, recycled narrative patterns, among other traditional compositional strategies. Viewing the Book of Mormon within the context of 19th century oratorical training and techniques, therefore, offers a performance-based approach to understanding the text. I just want to say, I think William Davis went under the tutelage of Terrell Givens, because there were a lot of big words there.
But, yeah, when you read the whole book, it's easier to understand what he's saying. It is kind of compressed. But when he says, Joseph Smith used to write the Book of Mormon such methods as the semi-extemporaneous. In other words, it is almost extemporaneous. It's semi because you're going off of a skeletal outline. Those are the heads that get laid down. In other words, the outline that gets created either in written form or memorized. Yeah, I read the book. So anyway, including such methods as the semi-extemporaneous amplification, that means adding to, fleshing out the narrative outlines that you've already got either written down or in your head. So that's what all that's saying. And I thought, oh my gosh, the expansion theory really is true. That's funny. That's a great joke. Really, is it Blake Ostler? Is that his theory? I think he'd like that joke.
Yeah, the expansion theories. There you are.
I understand he's got a temper on him. Kind of a hothead.
He is.
Well, in this presentation, I'm going to go over those semi-extemporaneous applications of skeletal narrative outlines, and also the recycled narrative patterns, and also that performance-based approach to understanding the text. So we're going to cover these things in some detail, maybe some things that I've seen as I've applied, basically William Davis's, methodology to looking at the text of the Book of Mormon, and then seeing things that I think that confirm exactly what he is talking about here.
Very good. Now, this was interesting. Here you're pairing up and matching Mosiah 9 and Mosiah 10. And I've got my Book of Mormon with me because I thought, are you playing fast and loose? Or are these really virtually the same story told in the same words with the same framework?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And it's, if anybody has read the Book of Mormon, they might have come across the story of Zenith, which is contained in Mosiah chapter 9 and chapter 10. And in the original Book of Mormon, it's only one chapter. So these two chapters are combined. But in the modern Book of Mormon, it's two different chapters. And you can go through, and I've done it here so that you can see it side by side, and match things up so that you can see that there's actually an outline of the storyline that is goes side by side, and there are gaps in the text there where I have shifted them so that the statements on one side match the statements on the other. So the best way to describe it would be a comedy set. If anybody loves comedy, you've probably watched your favorite comic perform either live or on Netflix in multiple different locations, and they often use the same jokes and present the same information, but what is actually presented on the night is different because the audience is different,
Mm.
the setting is different, the location might be different. And so, the comic knows and has planned what jokes they're going to hit and the wording that will get them to that, but the fillers in between them are going to be different because they might react to the audience, they might have a heckler, there's a number of different reasons why they might deliver it differently. And every time they deliver it, they're going to get slightly better because they'll read the audience, they'll play the joke better, they'll make it more exciting. And even if you've heard the comic punch the same joke before, you'll still laugh because sometimes the beauty is in the delivery, even if you know what's coming. And that
Very
is
good.
certainly the case. Sorry.
That's quite an introduction.
So certainly that's the case with Mosiah 9 and Mosiah 10, because they feel very different and they feel, like fresh understandings. But when you line them up side by side, you can see that they're actually the same. And I've highlighted on each chapter yellow bits that give you an understanding that this is a point, either very close or exactly the same wording. And then I've labeled in green a kind of an introductory statement that gives the same kind of idea, but it's a different set of words. It's a different setup.
Yeah, you get into manufacturing, but one is a city or buildings, and the other is weapons.
Correct. So if you go to the next slide,
Very good.
we're going further down the page,
And you still got the same chapters. This is still on the left. That's Mosiah 9, and on the right it's Mosiah 10, right?
That's correct. And you see, as you go down the chapters, you get to some really interesting comparisons. And in blue, I've given in both of these chapters, they have a list of 6 things, and in chapter 9, it's a list of food, so corn, wheat, barley, knees, sherum, and fruits. And in chapter 10, it's a list of 6 things: spin, toil, work, fine linen, cloth, and clothe our nakedness. So there's 6 independent but relatable things because the storyline is slightly different. And then you can see more of these yellow lineups that suggest, okay, these stories are the same. They're talking about the same kinds of events in exactly the same order. There's a few wording differences sometimes.
Yeah, you're definitely getting down to this interesting, very granular level. I think most people, upon a first, reading of the Book of Mormon, recognize that there are some big blocks of narrative that get repeated, like Ammon and serving the king of the Lamanites, and the whole thing that happens. Well, with him, he cuts off arms, but basically he goes in, he preaches the gospel to the king and the court, and then people fall down and everybody's amazed, and they get up and everybody's happy because they've all joined the Mormon church. And then the same thing happens with his brother Aaron. It's just a little bit not quite as detailed. It's the same story. It's like, why are the same stories happening? And there seems to be a lot of episodic kind of narratives that end up mirroring themselves or seeming to be a variation of a story that might have gone before. But even here at this very, very deep level that you're taking us to, it looks like even in the building blocks of the text, it's quite similar.
I'll just say, as a bystander, I'm seeing this. I looked over the outline of the slideshow before the show, but that was the first time I was seeing sort of this idea presented, that in these 2 chapters of Mosiah, they almost follow the exact same template. And I'll just say, as somebody looking at it, that sure looks strange. That looks strange if you're to believe this is an ancient text, with each story being sort of original and historical. I'm sort of find it quite odd to see that on the screen.
Let me break you into quote Ganesh to Ganesh, okay? On that other episode on that channel, we don't mention the name, that you did on Monday night, you said it's Mormonish, okay? You said something absolutely brilliant, I thought. It never occurred to me. But what you said about the Book of Mormon was that the Book of Mormon presents itself as being an ancient artifact from the ancient world, 600 years BCE. And yet it doesn't tell us anything about the ancient world. How can you have an entire book from an ancient world that doesn't tell you anything about it? You know what I mean?
It's a very, very good question. And
Well, you're the one who asked it. I'm just asking it back because I think it's so brilliant. Okay, we'll continue. Did you want me to change slides yet, or do you have more to say?
Yes, just one thing there, and you'll notice that in red I've got Lamanite explanation, and become evident in a minute. But the reason why these two chapters feel different is that they've got a insertion into them that is completely different. And so we'll just you'll see that in just a second. But if you go to the next one, and here is the towards the end here, or the third part, you see the same lineups for the yellow again, but you also see in verse 16 of chapter 9 and verse 8 of chapter 10, you get this group of 6 again, and this time they're almost exactly the same. Not quite, but almost exactly the same. So 16 is bows, arrows, swords, scimitars, and clubs and slings. And
the fact that they're connected in both cases by ands, that's the Hebraism. You know that, right?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to make sure.
Yeah. Phew. And then in chapter 10, you get bows, arrows, swords, scimitars, stones, and slings. So it's really interesting. You get these two patterns of 6 that are almost identical in the text, in the same place, in the same order of the other insertions, and it's very contrived. It
seems like a template, like a framework, ready to go. The only one that's different is number 5, isn't it? The first one has clubs, and the second one has stones instead of clubs in the list.
That's correct. And it may be that as Joseph is speaking it, he just comes up with a slightly different word. So he's innovating in the moment, like a comedy sketch where you might just throw out something different just to see how it fits.
Maybe in between the chapters they lost all their clubs or they got stolen, so they had to just pick up some rocks. That would answer. That's an apologetic. I'm going to recommend it right now.
I like it. All
right.
If you didn't do the next slide, then.
Yes, sir. Here we go. And on the right, it has Lamanite explanation now. So over here, 2 slides before, it says Lamanite explanation on the left. And here we have it on the right.
Yes. And so it's in different places in the 2 chapters, and it's a different explanation. We'll see in just a minute on the next slide. But this again just shows this is right up to the very end, and you see these yellow comparisons, and then you see at the end this green settling, so that it says basically the same thing, or kind of an ending, which kind of wraps it up in the same kind of way, but they're different wrap-ups. And then from verse 10 in Mosiah chapter 9 and verse 11 in Mosiah chapter 10, you've got these Lamanite explanations, and they're different. So one talks about how the Lamanites are cunning and crafty and bring people into bondage. And then the other Lamanite explanation talks about how the Lamanites have felt wronged and are angry with the Nephites, and that's why they're attacking them. So they're Lamanite explanations, but they're quite different Lamanite explanations, and they're inserted into the text in a different place in the sequence of the composition. So effectively, you're getting it feels different when you read Mosiah 9 and you then read the next chapter, Mosiah 10. You get a familiarity, but you don't feel like they're the same, when actually this is exactly the same.
Now we're going to a separate chapter now. So how did this pop out to you? I know they're in adjacent chapters, right?
Mm-hmm.
How does this pop out to you? Is this something you can even explain?
So earlier you talked about the story of Aaron and Ammon and Aaron being very similar, and Alma. And I had recognized that before. I'd seen that. And there are a few others of those throughout the Book of Mormon. There's the story of Korihor and the story of Sherem, which share the same narrative story, and the story of Noah and the story of King Replikish.
And there's 3 antichrists in the Book of Mormon. Don't forget Nehor.
Yeah, and Nehor is kind of if you take those 3 stories, Nehor and in the Mosiah priority, Nehor and then Korihor and then Sherem, you see that there's actually a progression. The 2 that are the most similar are actually Korihor and Sherem, but there are some things that Nehor and Korihor share. So it's quite an interesting development, and I think Joseph is developing as he goes.
Did you get around to answering my question? Was how did this pop out to you? If you can explain it.
Right. So then, so I knew that there were these narrative outlines that are being repeated, and when I was reading Mosiah 9 and 10, and just those, particularly those set of 6 in each of those chapters, I thought it's just odd that they're the same. And then when I started putting the 2 chapters side by side and comparing them, you could see that actually the whole thing was a narrative outline that was repeated, and it's beautiful, and it's beautifully well done. Like you've got to give Joseph props for coming up with this. This is an incredibly sophisticated delivery of something that is there, and it's. This is common. We memorize things and then we deliver it, especially if you're a performer of any kind. So this is not unusual, but the innovation he's able to make, and the fact that he's able to, go in and out of the sequence, and then come back to the sequence is really clever and shows a high level of ability.
Now you go to Mosiah chapter 22.
So here's another example of the same thing, but this is within the same chapter. This is Mosiah chapter 22, and where Joseph has taken a narrative outline and he's used it twice in the chapter, and he's created kind of almost like a secondary story. And I've labeled these so you can see them A, B, C, D, and E, and then shown that on the other side against, so you can see that they line up. And it's interesting that in the second part, it's not quite the same. It's A, B, C, E, and D. So it goes slightly awry, but the way that he delivers it, means that this is one half of the chapter mirrors the other half of the chapter.
That's because it's ancient, right? That's a Hebraism.
Yes.
If it were inverted, it would be a chiasm.
Yeah, that's right. If he reversed the last the ones, then we're just getting a chiasm. So it's really interesting that in his narrative, he's using these narrative skeletal outlines and then fleshing them out as he performs them. And then in his sermons, he's basically doing the same thing, but in reverse in the second part, so that you get a chiasm. And I don't think he thought about it as a chiasm, but it was a good way to distinguish between a narrative and a sermon.
So you are actually on the side of identifying intentional structures within the narrative of the Book of Mormon, but you would be saying this wasn't put in there by ancient Hebrews. It was put in there by a more modern Joseph Smith.
Correct.
And Absolutely. He used them in order to structure his story around.
Yeah. And
then he could reuse it.
Yeah. And he's doing that throughout the Book of Mormon in multiple places. So we, I mean, these two, Mosiah 9 and 10 are in the same, chapter. This one here in Mosiah chapter 2, this is also in the same chapter.
Tessa Smith says, so Joseph Smith plagiarized himself.
That's very cute.
It looks like it. Yes.
Yeah. Mm.
I'll just say, I mean, Lucy Mack Smith tells us that Joseph Smith stood before the family long before he's working on the translation of the Book of Mormon, and he is telling the family the stories of the Lamanites and the Nephites. All I posit there is that he had the chance to practice such things. He had the chance to work out such things. And for the apologist who will come in and go, yeah, this is just Mosiah inserting, this into the text, that's less rational. That these folks who are dealing with really deep stories of having to be involved in the things going on around them, life on the line, encountering warring tribes of Lamanites, trying to give out spiritual messages and sermons and trying to report back on the plates of what happened. It would be a strange thing for them to sort of repeat themselves over and over again while changing some of the details of each story as they tell it. That's just a weird thing.
Yeah. These stories are crafted. They're crafted after the fact. So even if they related to actual events, they have been crafted later to have this form.
That's what Mormon was doing.
The abridger,
the editor.
Yeah. That's the idea too, RFM, that would be the next argument, that Mormon is the abridger, Moroni is abridging this is their work, this is their fingerprints. But it reminds me sort of the books I would get when I was a kid, where the story would be told, but there would just be lines where you were to insert the word you wanted. And if the kid next to you had the same fun little doodle book that had those, he would have a completely different story. And I forget what they were called.
Ad-libs.
And that's what this sort of is. It's an ad lib from chapter to chapter where somebody just inserts a few different words and it looks like it's a completely different story.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
It's clever. It's simple and it's clever, right? That's great. The other part of this is
I'm sorry.
Sorry. I was just going to say that it can't be Mormon as the abridger because, firstly, Mosiah 9 and 10 is written in the first person of Zenith, so that's a bit tricky. But also, we see this go across the abridgers. So you see this in the places that Mormon abridged. You see it in the places across the places that Moroni abridged. So, for instance, with Noah and King Replicash, so that's Noah's and Mosiah, and King Replicash is in Ether, and they have two different abridgers. And then you see it in with Korihor, who's in with Mormon being an abridger, and you see it in Cherian where it's Jacob who's writing in the first person. So these are across different parts of the Book of Mormon, which suggests that the compiler is the same person.
It kind of helps answer the age-old chestnut about Abinadi. And who was it who wrote down exactly what it was he was preaching there to King Benjamin and his court?
Yeah. Mad libs, by the way, RFM.
Mad libs, not ad libs. Mad libs. Thank you.
I put one up on the screen. This is exactly what Ganesh is telling. I mean, this is when you see these side by side, this is exactly what it looks like.
You ever seen this, Ganesh? Do they have these down there?
I haven't seen anything quite like this, but I get the understanding.
Yeah. Same concept. Joseph Smith was the inventor of Mad libs. All right. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, go on there.
By the way, to finish that thought, the whole idea, this old chestnut about who could have written down what it was that Abinadi said, because Abinadi dies and everybody else is wicked, and Alma left before the burning, right before the barbecue. Alma's out of there. So who wrote it down? It's a question with no answer, because nobody within the narrative of the Book of Mormon could have written it down except for one person. And that's the guy who's writing the Book of Mormon. And his name's Joseph.
Yes, very good point. Yeah.
Are we the next one? Yes, sir. Here we go.
Okay, so here this happens a lot in the Book of Mormon, and I just wanted to give a few examples where Joseph has a narrative, a composition, and he's just reusing it again and again. So this type scene is called Fled from a Wicked King, and it has a number of different aspects. A wicked king, somebody who's doing evil, who casts out somebody who's righteous, pursues them with an intent to kill. The people flee.
That sounds like the incident at Mozambique.
Right? Exactly.
That sounds like the incident at Mozambique. Pursuing with the intent to kill.
We could absolutely put President Nelson's example into this.
We
into
should,
this
then we'd have
model.
three. We'd have three on this one slide. Okay.
So we see that in Mosiah chapter 17, verse 3 and 4. And I've put the numbers next to the words and highlighted them so you can see. We see that again in Mosiah chapter 11, verse 26 and 27 and 28. So we get that these same points are being hit. Then on the next slide, we've got, yep, that's fine. Ether chapter 13, verse 13, and then it jumps to 22. But so we get these points that are being pulled out into the text, and also in First Nephi chapter 3, so 25 to 27, and we're getting the same points that
So
are
you got
happening.
4 instances of this.
Correct. On
You've
this
got
particular
one in
type
2 in Mosiah, 1 in Ether, and 1 in First Nephi chapter 3.
Yep.
How brilliant do you have to be to recognize all of these during a reading through the Book of Mormon?
Well, the thing is that they're all got these little cues in them, right? So once you start to identify one, and then you just search for those words, and then suddenly you get these others quite easily.
Well,
and again, we see this in the 3 parts of the Book of Mormon: the Mormon abridged, the Moroni abridged, and the Nephi replacement text. So these are these three parts of the Book of Mormon identify that the type scene is being used across the whole of the Book of Mormon.
So let's put that, can I just break that down a little bit? Because I think that's fascinating what you just said. Of course, the idea being that up to Mosiah, these are the small plates of Nephi. They are written in first person. They were not edited by Mormon. They were put in as a lump, which he found later, and God told him, actually, it'd be a good idea for you to include these. So we have 2 sets of the same history, because that other set's going to get lost, because Joseph Smith isn't going to listen to me when I tell him, don't let Martin Harris take those 116 pages, right? So it is first person. So then the question, which I think you raise, is Mosiah, those 2 instances are in the part that Mormon abridged. Ether would be in the part that Moroni abridged.
Correct.
But First Nephi 3, nobody abridged that. That's Nephi writing first person, okay? So what significance then does it have that Nephi is using the same template, first person, as Mormon is doing in 3 separate instances? Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
And it makes it look like it's the same person doing all 4.
Exactly.
There's more.
And there's more. This one I think is fascinating, and it's because we don't talk about mythical creatures in the Book of Mormon very much, but there are dragons, and they're used in Mosiah chapter 20 and also Alma chapter 43. And the interesting thing about this is that this is another type scene, and the type scene is we've got fighting really strongly, and the word dragons is used in Mosiah and Alma, and then for their wives and children, that's really big in Mosiah 20, 43, and Mormon 2, and then we see another part of this type scene, which is the idea that there are twice as many Lamanites as there are Nephites, and yet the Nephites are victorious. So
it has to be that way so you can prove that God really was on your side.
Yeah. And so it's just, it's a beautiful little narrative, but it just gets repeated. And the fact that it uses dragons is just so,
Well, you're not going to say they did fight like puppy dogs. There's got to be something. I guess it could be lions, even just for the sake of variety.
Yeah.
But no, we've got dragons.
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 Mm. Okay, so all right, so that gives you an idea of the composition makeup of the Book of Mormon that's been crafted. So, and like we talked about at the beginning, that there are some autobiographical parts of the Book of Mormon, particularly the migration of Lehi through to the New World, mirrors the migration of Joseph and his family from Vermont through to Western New York. And then we've got the same understandings about Mormon, that the character Mormon and the prophet Mormon and Joseph are very similar. So one of the things I thought was fascinating, or at least I think I got from Mosiah, is that the kings in Mosiah mirror the people in the Smith household, and particularly the ones that are in charge.
Okay, so these are the three kings in Mosiah who are back in Nephi-Lehi after they go back to reclaim the land, and they get taken in by the wiles of the king and put in bondage, right? And they're allowed to have their own kings for whatever reason. It doesn't seem like a smart move on the part of the Lamanites, but what the heck. So the Nephites have their own kings, and there's Zeniff, and he's a good guy. He's the one who let him out there, probably. And then there's Noah, and he's really, really bad. And then there's Limhi, and he's okay. He looks like a general authority doing some cosplay.
And Limhi is very, he's benign, like he's a tributary leader. So he gets to be king, but, kind of, not because he's amazing, just because he's kind of keeping the peace.
All right. But you have some names next to these.
Yes. So if you're reading about Joseph Smith's family history, particularly if you read his mother's account of their family, what you learn is that Alvin was particularly industrious. He helped secure the family in Palmyra and their purchase of their land and building of their house. That he, and we understand that Joseph Smith Sr. was a little impaired, not very well trusted, had lost the family fortune prior, and Zeniff, as a older teenager and into his early adulthood, was taking charge of the family. And under his leadership, the family prospered. When the mortgage on the family farm came due, Alvin went out and worked hard away from home to secure the funds needed to pay the mortgage, and he saved the family. And that's what Zeniff did for the people in Mosiah chapter 9 and 10. He led the people, and even though the Lamanites came against them to take them over, he fought them back. And that's what Alvin did with the creditors on the family farm. But Alvin died suddenly and left a leadership vacuum, which Joseph Smith Sr. had to step back into, because Hiram, even though he's the next in line, Hiram's not a great leader. He's Sam in the story of Lehi. He's a benign older brother who's pleasant and supportive, but not in charge. And so Joseph Smith Sr. has to step back into the role.
I'm sorry, when you said he's Sam, I thought you were talking about in The Lord of the Rings.
Oh, no, I meant in Lehi and Sariah's family. Hiram is
that's
Sam.
Not Sam Gamgee. Because I could see that description being of Sam too. Sam Gamgee,
yes,
right?
Yes, a supportive,
he's very loving.
He's not the lead character, but he's definitely a supportive and important character, right?
Yeah.
So when Alvin dies, Joseph Smith Sr. steps back into the role of the family provider, and he's not a great family provider. He's a treasure seeker and speculative, and he gets Joseph to do treasure digging, and they go they get a job with Josiah Stoll to go down to Harmony, Pennsylvania, and treasure dig. And while they're away, the creditors descend on Lucy Mack and Hiram, and basically they foreclose on the family farm. And so Lucy, with she's a woman, so she can't do it, but she advises Hiram to make some negotiations, and they manage to get somebody else to buy the family farm instead and have them as tenants on the land. And so then Hiram, brokers all that, and now he's kind of in charge of making sure that as tenants, they are doing what they need to do to fulfill their requirements. Joseph Smith Sr. loses the family farm. Hiram, manages it as a tenant. And that's what happens to Limhi. Limhi loses, Noah loses the kingdom, and Limhi negotiates a tenancy in the land of Nephi-Lehi.
So, Ganesh, on a scale of 1 to 10, how sure are you that this is correct?
I'd say 8 or 9.
Wow, that's optimistic.
I've talked a little bit to Dad. I've talked a little bit to Dad about this. He's not so convinced.
That's okay. Reasonable minds can differ.
Did you say the landlord's name? By the way, wasn't his name Laman or Laban or something?
It's Lemuel Durfee.
Lemuel, yes, yeah. Okay, yep. Thank you.
So that's really interesting too, because Lemuel is cast as the bad guy in in the brothers, right?
Yes, there is one more step to sort of show that Joseph Smith has got this sort of narrative on his mind.
Yeah,
which is that he uses the name Lemuel. Yep.
Well, I like how he cast Noah as a bad guy, sort of against type,
So, Noah, it's interesting. Joseph loves his father, but he becomes aware of his father's failings, and one of the big narratives of Noah's kingship is that he loses the kingdom because his attention is elsewhere, not on righteous things. It's on it's on gold and building and speculative stuff, not on.
Yeah, and for Joseph Smith Sr., one of the things that he was deeply embattled in, based on the evidence, seems to be alcoholism. And we even have the one story. I don't want to go crazy here, but we have the one story where Joseph Smith Sr. Alleged by, I don't know if it's Samuel Lawrence or who it is, but that Joseph Smith Sr. is drunk at the tavern, and somebody challenges him that he has small genitals, and he pulls out his genitals and they take a measurement. And I don't know if he wins the bet or he loses, but this is a real.
Let's just put it this way: they had to use a yardstick.
This is a real witness account, and there many sources early in church history point to Joseph Sr. having a problem with alcohol, and that kept him from being responsible. And as a kid, watching your dad lose his home and his property because of that, even if you love him, there's good reason there to also have some hurt feelings and to see your dad as like, damn it, Dad, why couldn't you just step up and do the right thing?
And the good news is that Joseph was able to save his dad through the church.
Yeah.
Yep. Get him to stop drinking and admit his ways.
And make him patriarch.
Yeah. And look, Noah, one of Noah's big crimes is wine bibbing. He's planting vineyards and he's getting drunk.
Okay. Well, it's interesting. When I said he's against type, I mean of the Noah that everybody knows, right?
All right.
Because I come into this, it was confusing. It's very clear to me because I come into this when I'm 18, and I know Noah, and everybody knows Noah, and he's in the good category, right? Over here is the good people. He's good. Noah's good, and then you come across this really bad guy, this kind of two-dimensional bad guy in the Book of Mormon, whose name is Noah, and it's disconcerting at first. But what you say is interesting because Noah's story, in addition to the ark, is getting drunk, keeping the vineyards and getting drunk. And I guess this Noah does the same thing.
He's got but Thomas Murphy talks about Noah being Noah Satians, which is a Jewish guy who formed an island in the Great Lakes. So Joseph is probably taking a bit of artistic license with the events of his life and combining people that into categories. So none of these people are one particular person in specific, but they're a combination of things that he's drawing for his story. But I think the idea of these Lamanite battles being creditor battles being an incredibly interesting comparison, because I think we could all feel like we're battling against our mortgages and and the demands of the money on our time.
Oh, at the
And
end of every month, I tell people, I got to go and throw some meat to my creditors.
yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. Keep them away from the door.
Mm.
Oh, dueling fathers.
Yes. So so if we can cast Noah, King Noah, as Joseph Smith Sr., then we might be able to understand a little dynamic that is playing out in Joseph's life with his fathers, his natural father, Joseph Smith Sr., and his father-in-law, Isaac Hale. Because when Joseph and his dad go to Harmony, Pennsylvania to dig for Josiah Stoll, and they first meet the Hale family because they board at their home while they're doing this treasure dig. And Isaac Hale talks about this later, that when he first met the pair, that he found Joseph to be this guy who was arguing with his dad and not very respectful, and also Isaac Hale disapproved of this whole endeavor. He was a faithful Methodist who did not believe in seer stones and buried treasure and ghosts under the ground. And he just thought it was a big con. And so he really was not supportive of, the business that Joseph Smith Sr. was engaged in. And he certainly didn't think much of Joseph Smith Jr., who was, leading this treasure dig with his seer stone. But Joseph, he was poor, and he's working for his dad in the speculative thing, which is problematic. He goes to Harmony, Pennsylvania. He boards with the Hales, who are relatively wealthy, and they've got a gorgeous daughter that he's really interested in. And Isaac Hale and Emma have a particularly close and beautiful relationship. And I think that he just sees a lot of contrasts. He sees his father, who's, pretending Christian, who is, really about speculative money digging. And he sees this guy who's got this amazing daughter and a beautiful relationship with her, who's interested in her learning and makes sure that she is, taken care of and gets good education and gets good clothing and gets good ability. And Joseph Jr. is scraping together next to nothing and can't do much. And
so Joseph Jr. would naturally put Isaac Hale on a pedestal of righteousness compared to his dad, the Souse.
Absolutely. And this happens, or at least we know that Joseph and Emma elope, and Isaac Hale is incredibly upset by this. Peter Ingersoll, who's a neighbor and a friend of the Smiths, drives Joseph and Emma down to Harmony, Pennsylvania to get some of Emma's things, and they reconcile. And one of the things that Isaac is really upset about is that Joseph has stolen his daughter, but also he thinks that what Joseph is doing with this money digging is just the worst thing ever. And Joseph promises Isaac Hale, according to Peter Ingersoll, that he's going to give up the money digging trade and make good on his relationship with Emma and providing for her. And so this is the court of Noah. Noah has the money diggers, the priests of Noah. Joseph Smith Jr. is one of those priests, one of those money diggers, and he's watching or understanding this battle of morals, really, around the difference between beautiful, Christianity and his dad's money digging, and this is becoming quite a contrast in their lives, and he's going to have to choose one or the other. And
Joseph wouldn't just be one of the priests; he'd be Alma, right? Because then he runs out and starts a church.
Exactly, and that's exactly what happens. So, one of the really interesting things that happens is, of course, that Martin Harris comes down to Harmony, Pennsylvania, and the lost manuscript is produced. And Isaac Hale is completely against this because he just sees Joseph with his head in the hat doing the same thing that he did with the treasure digging for Josiah stolen in 1825, and he just hates it. But he generally allows them to. Well, they're on a different part of the section, and then Martin Harris takes the manuscript back to Palmyra because Joseph and Emma are having their first child, who was born and died on June the 15th, 1828. So Joseph loses his first child. Emma is really sick. She almost dies. Lucy Mack says that on insistence by Emma, Joseph goes back to Palmyra to retrieve the lost manuscript because this is 2 months worth of work that they have done. They're both farmers. This is a big chunk of economic value, and finds that Martin Harris has lost the manuscript. It is a devastating loss, on top of the fact that he's lost his son and almost lost his mother. His wife, Emma, comes back to Harmony. He's bereft. This is when you see Doctrine and Covenants section 3, the revelation about the wicked man, Martin Harris. Apparently God doesn't know that at that particular time that Martin Harris is going to be a witness to the Book of Mormon. But in Doctrine and Covenants section 3, he's a wicked man. The whole section is really, a chastisement. Joseph feels chastised. He tries to join his wife's family's Methodist church, and they chuck him out because he's a necromancer. That's what Emma's cousins talk about. And so he's not getting any support. He doesn't know when he's spent all this time and energy into this book that he's lost. It's a devastating position to be in. And I think in this moment, he's having to choose between his father and the speculative treasure digging, and his father-in-law who wants him to be a honest, upright citizen. And he decides that if this Book of Mormon thing is going to come to fruition, he needs to make a major change. He needs to repent. He is Alma being convicted by Isaac Hale's disagreements against his father, and he's going to make a change. And so the Book of Mormon becomes, in 1829, much more spiritual on the back of this incredible transformation that Joseph does, because these terrible things happen and he has to rely on God.
And I'll just
go, Bill.
I'll just note there's a plot hole that happens, and it's sort of, you see something but you shouldn't have seen it, which is that Abinadi, Alma the elder, who is convinced by Abinadi and gets cast out. He runs off, he leaves, he goes away. And yet we still know what Abinadi says after that moment, which makes no sense because then we don't have anybody who's there to write the story. RFM, you're smiling. What your thoughts?
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So while the Book of Mormon tells you the rest of what Abinadi states, there's nobody there to record it as scripture. Everybody in the room are the baddies. And so how would anyone know exactly what his words were? And then he's burned and it's done. So there's a plot hole. So whoever the author is of the story decides to tell you what Abinadi has said in these closed door meetings when the one person who is responsible to write things later has left the room and isn't there.
Yeah.
And actually, we know in the Joseph Smith history too that after Joseph Smith goes back to Palmyra with his father in 1825, and they lose the family farm, Joseph leaves. He leaves Palmyra. He goes to Colesville and Bainbridge to work for Josiah Stoll and Joseph Knight Sr., and actually lives with them for a bit of time, and goes to school. He works and goes to school while he's there, and he kind of almost turns his back on his family in Palmyra.
I was going to say that you were describing this very, very passionately, almost mesmerizingly. being so sympathetic to the position and what's going on around him. But it made me recall how important it was to me as a young person to be right with God. And that's why I joined this church, because that's why I went on a mission. It was that important to me to be right with God. And I know it was with you, Bill, too, because you joined the church. How about you, Ganesh? Yeah, absolutely. So I can see him feeling that way very passionately, and seeing this example over here of his father-in-law as being very distinct and better than his own father. Because you're usually going to judge your own, family harsher anyway.
Ganesh, have you done again, one of the things that's come out in the last year with a lot of RFM's work and various things being done to sort of start thinking about the Book of Mormon in ways like you're talking about tonight, is to sort of look at timelines. And do we know roughly, because we can sort of guess, educated guess in terms of Mosiah priority and the translation process and when he's at certain things. For instance, the idea of infant baptism, Dan Vogel posited that occurs right at the time that Joseph and Emma lose their first kid, their first child. And so Joseph gets to put into the scriptures the comfort to Emma that she would be feeling tortured over. Do we know if the time that Joseph is dealing with Isaac Hale and has maybe sort of a more fond feeling of Isaac before things go south, if that would be sort of around the same time that this sort of story would have been put into the Book of Mormon?
No, it doesn't line up quite like that. Because the story about the kings, Zeniff, Noah, and Limhi, they're recounting historic information for Joseph Smith's life. So, Alvin dies in 1823, for instance, and they lose the family farm in 1825 and into 26. And so at this point that Joseph is putting these into Mosiah, which is 1829, he's talking about past events, which is actually another reason why this is very plausible, because you've got to realize that in the Book of Mosiah, this is a what they call it, it's a reminiscence, it's a backdate. So the story starts out in Mosiah with King Mosiah concerned about the people who had left some time ago. So King Mosiah is in Zarahemla, and he's wondering about the people in the north in Lehi Nephi, and he sends a mission, a guy called Ammon, actually, the first Ammon in the Book of Mormon, to go and find these people, and he finds Limhi. And then Limhi tells him, look, I'm under bondage. And he recounts the story of Zeniff, then Noah, and then why Limhi is in this terrible situation. So this is really fascinating in the sense that we have an account from actually Lucy Harris's sister, where she's talking to Lucy Mack, and she recounts the detail that Joseph is worried about them, and she's trying to borrow money so that Joseph can take the stagecoach and come and see them. So we know that Joseph is in Harmony, Pennsylvania, worried about his family who are getting evicted from their house. And this is in real time. And then there is this recounting of this history of how this terrible situation came to pass in the first place, which recounts these various kings. So if we think of Zarahemla as Harmony, Pennsylvania, and the Mulekites as as these somewhat righteous Christians who are somewhat corrupted, like the Hale and Lewis families that are in the area, and we think of Joseph as King Mosiah, he's thinking about his family in Lehi Nephi and recounting their history. And he's turning this into a Christian adventure story with these kings fighting off the Lamanites. So that brings us to Alma as the repentant priest. You know, he's seen that there's a big disparity between Abinadi and Noah, and so he's gone off into the wilderness to start his own little commune and be righteous. And that's exactly what Joseph did. He left Palmyra. He went to Bainbridge and South Bainbridge and Colesville, and that's where he kind of, you know, reinvented himself a little bit. Where he courted Emma for some time, and then eventually stole her from Isaac Hale, because he approached Isaac about, you know, courting her, and Isaac would have nothing of it because his profession was, you know, a priest of Noah, a money digger, and so they eloped. Yeah, went back to Palmyra. So we see these kind of characters and their dynamics playing out in Joseph Smith's own history and in his own life, which I think is really interesting. I think there's more work to be done in this to flesh out some of these stories and somewhat to be able to. Joseph doesn't write anything about his life until after the Book of Mormon, so we only have things that he's recounting later, that his mother is recounting later, but also affidavits from neighbors in Palmyra and you know, the in-laws in Harmony. So there are lots of gaps, but the things that line up so very well with these events and stories and kingships in Mosiah.
I've mentioned before, and this is another example of how strangely I had the words right in my head. How responsive, that's it. How unusually responsive the Book of Mormon is to its environment in which it's being created, in which it's being dictated, in which Joseph Smith is translating it, okay? That environment. The Book of Mormon is so, and whatever that word was, responsive to that environment. It's amazing. And the only thing that makes it more amazing is that it was written hundreds and thousands of years ago. And yet they could see our day so clearly that the Book of Mormon does everything it needs to do in Joseph Smith's own environment. It answers all the religious questions of the day. Whoever wrote it knew about what all those issues would be and all those arguments would be about. And so the Book of Mormon provides answers, and it even seems to respond to what's going on around it. It's like an early version of Siri. It's listening, and it ends up replicating what's going on in Joseph's life as well.
Yeah, it's very clever that Searstone is obviously listening and recounting. You know,
that's it. It's in the stone.
Yeah. Siri, Alexa, this is just modern examples of what we're dealing with here. Okay, so the next part is, and you alluded to this at the beginning, RFM, and the idea of King James Version dependency, and you guys have done a number of sessions about this, which are so this is just an overview, but we can't hit this, too lightly. The fact is, our Book of Mormon is dependent on a King James version.
It's the smoking gun.
Yeah.
This proves that the Book of Mormon was not written prior to 1611.
That's right. Because you if it was, like Lehi coming out of Jerusalem, he'd be coming out with a different version of Isaiah. We would have something that is ancient and as valuable as the Dead Sea Scrolls. It would just be the best thing on the block.
It would be, oh my gosh, there was this whole community here. We kind of knew about it because we found the ruins and stuff, but now we got all the writings and we can find out what they believed and what they did and have arguments about it instead of something that is just warmed over Methodism.
Yeah. And I'll just note, it would be quite odd for Heavenly Father in one instance to go, yeah, just go grab that old Bible, transfer the heirs over, no big deal. But in just a short amount of time, I'm going to care so much about the Bible being restored from its corrupted form that I'm going to ask you to engage in a new Bible translation.
Boy, that's a good point.
And so why would Heavenly Father on one instance go, who the hell cares? A few errors, schmears, who cares? And then just a short time later go spend months and maybe years figuring this shit out, you know?
Wow. Yeah. That's a good point.
And the other problem with that is, of course, the things that Joseph did with the, translation of the Bible. It negates some of the things that are in the Book of Mormon. The Bible, passages in the Book of Mormon. So it's just, doesn't.
Can you give us an example of that?
So there's a couple of places that he changes the text to be. Well, I think of one where he changes the text to be more almost Trinitarianism, but it's modalism. The idea that it's the New Testament is modalist. And so he does that in response to just defining his own version of what God and Jesus are like.
Okay. So you have some errors in italics and Zenos and Zenoch?
So yeah, as Bill pointed out, there are some errors in the book of in the King James version of the Bible that make its way into the Book of Mormon, and the most famous one is, of course, the place that John the Baptist baptizes, which is
beyond Bethabara.
Bethabara, yeah, and which should be Bethany, but it's wrong in the King James version, and that's copied into the Book of Mormon.
Oh, it's supposed to be Bethany.
Yeah,
I didn't know it was a mistake.
And then, of course, as people have pointed out, the italics in the King James version of Isaiah are the more likely places where the Isaiah is changed in the Book of Mormon slightly. So, and that's because the italics in the King James version told people where the translators had to insert words so that the sentences would make sense. So Joseph Smith is using those to redefine some small aspects of Isaiah.
Joseph Smith looks for gaps in places to create things, and he was a master at it. And I know you talked about that at more length last Monday on Mormonish.
Rebecca and Landon will be proud. So, and then of course we have these two extra biblical prophets in the Book of Mormon, Zenos and Zenoch, which surprisingly seem a lot like Enos and Enoch with a Z.
What are you talking about? There's a Z. We call it a Z here in the Northern Hemisphere. No, a Z. There's a Z
yes,
in front of them. They're not the same at all. One is Zenos. The other is Enos. One is Zenoch. The other is Enoch. They're totally different.
Exactly. But these would be incredible finds if you managed to find new biblical or Old Testament prophets that are testifying of Christ. And that's how they're used in the Book of Mormon too, to provide additional witnesses to the idea that Christ is in the Old Testament. And yet, these are suspiciously absent from any other record except the Book of Mormon.
Enos and Enoch are the same figure in the Bible, and here Joseph is adding a Z to both of them and uses them in the exact same sentence, same theme. I do think that's a little peculiar. Yeah.
And Joseph just loved the letter Z. I mean, C.
It's almost like Pig Latin, isn't it?
Yeah.
We'll call it Zed Latin in honor of you. Just put
well,
a
I'm
Z
from
in
New
front
Zealand.
of it.
We're really attached to our Z's.
You got a proper noun that starts with a vowel. Just put a Z in front, and you're good to go.
Yeah.
And just so I clarify, because somebody's going to want to correct me, but I just want to show what I'm talking about. I want to put this up on the screen. Give me 2 seconds here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean this is the same person in terms of like what's the
Elias and
yeah,
Elijah.
yeah. I'm not getting confused with that. I'm not saying that. So again, not to be confused with Enoch here, but Enos or Enosh, the name would have been sort of similar to both of those, and it's the same person, is what I'm saying right here.
Enos, and Enosh,
Yeah,
which are probably, I don't know the languages, but they sound like they might be related to Enoch.
correct. Yep, that's my point. Yep.
And this is the first son of Seth, as opposed to the seventh son of Adam, who was Enoch.
There you go.
Yeah. Fabulous.
That's right. Adam, Seth, Enos.
Yeah.
Got terrible fun of him. He got terrible fun made of him when he was on the playground in junior high school with a name like that. Enos, are you kidding me? What were you thinking?
Yeah, well, parents, they're sometimes cruel to their children.
You got to be as cruel as the kids on the playground. You got to figure out in advance what fun's going to be made of your kid's name so you don't give it to them.
Yeah. And you should always work through the rhyming words.
You were saying Ganesh? I don't know. Ganesh, that's a tough one. What do you do with that?
I fortunately, I didn't get teased as much as you might think I did.
Okay, so Bible material that shouldn't be in text. What does that mean?
Yeah, so that's just basically saying there's a lot of stuff that we see in the Book of Mormon that just can't possibly be there unless there's some kind of miraculous transmission between the old world and the new world in space and time. It just doesn't work out.
When apologists have to finally get to the point where it's so irrefutable, and they do, that they postulate that Joseph Smith opened his Bible and then just copied out of the Bible or read out of the Bible. In other words, when they have to create a scenario that looks like a fraud, all right, then that's a problem for the apologists. But that's where they are.
Yeah,
in other words, Joseph Smith did everything that looked like a fraud, but God told him to do it. So it's okay, folks.
Yeah. And that seems to be a common apologetics throughout his life, because then he ended up doing a number of really problematic things, and God told him to do it. So everything that God tells you to do is right, no matter what the thing is, apparently.
Right. And now, details of Jesus dependent on the KJV New Testament, details of Jesus in the Book of Mormon.
Correct. So you said this last week, RFM. Well, there's nothing that you can learn about Jesus in the Book of Mormon that's not already in the King James Version of the Bible. Right?
It's true. In spite of what Todd Callister likes to say and how incredible the Book of Mormon is and its doctrine about Jesus and the atonement, it's not true. Okay. Everything, if you've got a set and a subset, right? And you got what you can learn about Jesus from the Book of Mormon, and you got what you can learn about Jesus from the Bible or the New Testament. All right. What you can learn about Jesus from the New Testament is much bigger. And the Book of Mormon is a subset of what you can learn about Jesus. But the amazing thing is there's nothing in the Book of Mormon about Jesus that you can't learn in the New Testament. In other words, it's a completely, if it's a Venn diagram, it's completely within the New Testament Jesus material, is the Book of Mormon material.
And that's a huge problem, because you think that if you're getting more inspiration, if these are prophets that aren't, they're getting direct information from God about Jesus, that would know so many things, right? What he did before he went on his ministry, who his best friend was, they
know how he tied his shoelaces. Yeah. That's how good the Book of Mormon is.
Yeah.
They can tell you Jesus's name hundreds of years before he's born. They can tell you the name of his mother. They can tell you where he was born. Oops. They can tell you the river he's going to be baptized in. They can tell you the name of the guy who's going to baptize him hundreds of years before. They can tell you the name of the guy who's going to write the last book in the Bible. They can tell you that last book is going to be in a collection called the Bible, all hundreds of years before. It's absolutely amazing. What's amazing is that the Book of Mormon sees everything with crystal clarity in the future, right? Whereas nothing in the Old Testament sees anything with that kind of clarity. Nobody has ever seen anything with that kind of clarity. President Russell freaking Nelson doesn't see anything with that kind of clarity. And it kind of makes you wonder, are they seeing the future with that kind of clarity? Or are they really looking at the past?
Yeah, and just to note for folks along the lines of what you're saying, Joseph Smith, if he's the author of the Book of Mormon, it makes perfect sense, because the ability of the Book of Mormon to define specifically what's going on in the future ends right at the moment that Joseph Smith is translating and publishing the Book of Mormon. In other words, the Book of Mormon is really good at talking about Christopher Columbus and that the translator will be named Joseph and his father
The
will be named
Revolutionary
Joseph.
War?
Yeah. But you go forward and the Book of Mormon is silent. It doesn't know anything in spite of the fact that it's written for our day.
Right. And as someone whose name I'm not allowed to share at this point, although he's kind of a big deal, has told me one of his problems with the Book of Mormon came, I think maybe his critical problem with the Book of Mormon, of which he's a staunch defender, came when he realized this whole idea the Book of Mormon talks about being written for our day, and it hit him like a 2x4. No, it's not. The Book of Mormon was written for Joseph Smith's day. It's not written for our day. If it were written for our day, it would have a whole lot to say about a whole lot of things that we're dealing with today. But it's not. It's only interested in the things that were important in Joseph Smith's day.
Yeah, exactly. And you're absolutely right too, Bill, that one of the things that we never talk about is the prophecies of Jesus in the Book of Mormon in chapters 21, 22, 23. So
I call those, I'm sorry, Ganesh. I call those the chapters that we never talk about. They're like the secret teachings of Jesus, because we never talk about them, because you read them and you're going, what the hell is he talking about? Is he on peyote or something? Because he is giving a dystopian vision of the future in the United States and in the world that never happened.
Yeah, that's right. So if we can't rely on the Book of Mormon Jesus to prophesy and for that prophecy to come to pass, it's another problem on top of multiple problems. So the other one too, I found fascinating. Somebody pointed out to me that the Book of Mormon Jesus is a vengeful Jesus. He just destroys all of these cities just before he comes, which is in line with the New Testament revelation of this, apocalyptic Jesus. The Gospels Jesus is a hippie, right? He loves everybody. He protests power, and he's making sure that the little guy is taken care of. But the Revelation Jesus is an apocalyptic, person who puts people into fire and brimstone and casts them out because they're wicked. And that Jesus turns up in the Book of Mormon to destroy all of the cities around prior to him turning up at the temple. So it's
very much so.
Yeah. So we get it's a very interesting Jesus that we get, and it's dependent again on a King James version.
Oh, wait a second. Okay. Excuse me. I didn't know I was going to do that. Okay. Significance penetrating thick skull. Yeah. So the Jesus in the Book of Mormon is dependent upon the Jesus in the New Testament, specifically the Jesus in the Book of Revelation in the New Testament.
Yeah.
Got it.
I mean, it does turn up as a savior, healer figure as well. But, the idea that...
Well, after he's killed everybody else.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
He'll heal the people that he missed. Because he's a good sport about things.
Yeah. Look, it's such a good guy. That's the kind of Jesus I want in my life.
So no added details of Jesus. Sermon on Mount. I'm sorry. I'm not sure. Okay. We're probably to no added details of Jesus or of Christ.
Yeah. And in the Sermon on the Mount, right, we have Well, we have the Sermon on the Mount in the Book of Mormon, pretty much word for word. We don't have the Sermon on the Plains from the New Testament, which, if you were looking at various accounts of Jesus's sermons, the Sermon on the Plains and the Sermon on the Mount are actually talking about the same event. But of course, the one that we get in the Book of Mormon is the version of the Sermon on the Mount, which is recounted as the Sermon on the Temple. Oh gosh, that's a lot of sermons. But
it is, and from the Q source.
From the Q source. So these just line up for dependency again on the King James Version, not on. And the other big thing about this is, of course, we've got the Bible, which is in Hebrew and Greek, which is then turned and translated into English. The pathway for the Book of Mormon is through presumably Hebrew and Reformed Egyptian that is now turned into English. And so just the fact that there are different pathways should mean that they come out differently, even if they were the same stuff originally. Mm-hmm. And the fact that they come out identical is a huge problem that shows dependency again on a King James version of the Bible.
Because really, I think there were different stuff, very different things at the beginning, and then they both got translated in different ways, and then they're identical. That's the miracle of it.
Yes. So many miracles when it comes to the Book of Mormon. I don't know why we're even debating that Joseph might have handled this.
Because it would be a miracle if it were real, if it were true, if it were what it claims to be. Yeah. That's how I like to frame it instead of saying true. True is more just for semantic effect, but if it's what it claims to be, then it would be a miracle if it were what it claims to be. Okay. So you have, the vengeful Christ, we talked about that.
Yeah. So then what do we have in the Book of Mormon that informs you about anything? Well, we have lots of Joseph Smith's environment, right? We have, when I went through each page of the Book of Mormon, reading it, thinking about Joseph Smith's environment, we have everything that tells us about that. Industry, farming, the agriculture, the horticulture, the domestication of animals. We even have plows in the Book of Mormon, which suggests that there's plows suggest that that there are plow animals that are able to draw them. So these are
that's not true. Any more than having chariots means that there's animals to draw them.
Even if the chariot and the animals are mentioned in the same sentence.
Yes. Don't make that mistake again. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. So Joseph, the Book of Mormon is describing a 19th century America.
That's what I mentioned to Bill the other day, Ganesh, is that when it comes to the animals, except for the Curulums and the Cumums, of course, it's like Joseph Smith got up, walked outside, and just wrote down all the freaking animals that are out there, right? And it's like he thought, well, they're here now. They've always been here.
Yeah.
He had no idea that at least half, if not more than half of the animals that he's looking out there were not here during the time he's putting the Book of Mormon, which has caused a lot of problems ever since and a lot of mental gymnastics.
Yes.
And some animals get substituted to make it work. Some animals need to be substituted with other animals, and yet God has no problem saying curlums and cumums or whatever. It's such a strange thing.
Right. So God has to say horse instead of tapir, right? God has to say horse instead of tapir. But when it comes to a curulum and a cumum, we'll just give you the regular name for it. You don't have to do any of this loan shifting back and forth.
That's a problem. And we see the warfare. We've got the American Revolution, some of the battles in there. We see some of the battles of the War of 1812. The best one is the sacking of Zarahemla, which is the capital city of the Nephites, and that is an event in American history. In 1814, the British managed to get all their way to Washington and occupy it and sack the White House. And, so this was the terrorist, event of its day the invading foreign forces managing to take over your capital and destroy your holy ground. That happens in the Book of Mormon. There are a number of strategic battles in the Book of Mormon that mirror battles in the French and Indian War, the Revolutionary War, and in the War of 1812. Joseph is a student of warfare because he's there. He's in the War of 1812. It's happening on his doorstep. He's 7-8 years old, and this is happening in New England on the border between. A lot of the battles are happening on the border between Canada and the US. So this is near his home, and he's lame, and he's presumably reading about them in the paper. It's very, very big. And of course, American Indians, the ways in which American Indians are, or the ways in which the Lamanites are described in the Book of Mormon, is very much the ways that early American settlers believed about the American Indians, right? The mounds, and ascribing the building of those to various peoples, and the ways in which American Indians were uncouth and uneducated and illiterate compared
the loincloth,
and
the Great Spirit.
The Great Spirit.
Isn't that incredible? He's got one of the Lamanite kings saying the Great Spirit.
Yeah.
You almost had him saying ugh. And I tell you, I didn't want to know. I wanted to believe that Great Spirit was a modern invention that had been put into, scripts, Western scripts and movies and TVs in the 50s and 60s that I grew up on, right? Because, I'd heard that all the time in movies and stuff. The character that's a Native American will talk about the Great Spirit, right? I did not want it to be older than the Book of Mormon. I didn't want to look. But then I finally looked, and damn it. Yeah, it's older than the Book of Mormon. This attribution, it may even be correct, I'm not sure. But attribution of talking about God as the Great Spirit among Native Americans. And you got it in the Book of Mormon too.
Yeah, it just lines up so well with a lot of the prejudice and stereotypes of its day, including skin color, right? The Book of Mormon is a version of how the leopard got its spots, how the Native Americans are brown and disgusting and dirty and savage. It's very reductive and incredibly racist.
Well, you got Samuel the Lamanite being a hero later on.
Yeah, and look, we've got a few goodies amongst the
Joseph
bad apples.
Says, I have friends who are Lamanite. I have a friend who's a Lamanite.
Exactly.
But at least it's not completely 100% that way. So I guess we have to acknowledge that.
And one of the fascinating things is, as a New Zealander, the church in New Zealand is very brown. It's made up of Pacific Islanders and Māori and a lot of immigrants. And so, brown people are well represented in New Zealand church. And so when I lived in the United States, I found that I read the Book of Mormon differently. When I was in New Zealand, I read the Book of Mormon as with the Lamanites being the heroes, because they, put down their weapons of war. There's Samuel the Lamanite, and of course, at the end, the Lamanites are, don't get destroyed, right?
Yeah.
But when I lived in the States, I read the Book of Mormon as if the Nephites were the heroes, because they're militaristic, they're fighting for freedom throughout the world, they are white and delightsome, and that's how my wards were. So it's interesting that you can read the Book of Mormon and confirm your worldview in the place that you are.
Very interesting. Something about democracy, kingmen versus freemen. Yeah, they're having an argument. They're having battles. They're having wars about whether they should have a monarchy or a democracy. Where did that come from?
I have no idea, but it seems to be very...
In 1830, 1776 wasn't that far away, was it?
No, Joseph Smith's granddad fought in the Revolutionary War.
Yeah.
Both of them, and Isaac Hale as well.
And if people are learning in their day any level of history, there's only so much American history in 1830. The Revolutionary War would have just been a big deal.
And it was a big deal for the War of 1812 too, because that's the Second Revolutionary War, and there were a number of people who wanted to reunite with Britain, and they were the Federalist Party. They had quite they protested against going to war with Britain, and the end of the war, the Federalists were kind of shot down. It was a new age of kind of patriotism in the United States to revitalize the idea that yes, this republic is going to go ahead, and it's real and it's worthwhile.
Ganesh, is that a picture of John Jay?
yeah, it is pretty well. It's supposed to be William Morgan, but it does look a lot like.
There's something about him that reminded me of John Jay. I'm sorry, I don't know what William Morgan looks like.
So that's the other part. Political events. What are the things that are going on at the time? Right in Western New York, there's the scandal with William Morgan, who's writing the expose against the Freemasons, who gets kidnapped, and he's never returns, so they presume he's dead, and this sparks the whole anti-Masonry party and a huge backlash from lots of people against Mason society, and that ends up with secret combinations in the Book of Mormon. So this very there are a number of political events which just mirror the Book of Mormon's problems very, very closely.
Can I just note another thing about the Kingmen and Freemen? Alma 51. So first off, there's a debate about whether they want the laws changed. Again, I'm reminded of the Revolutionary War and how that all came to be. There were certain taxes and stuff enforced, and the folks on this side of the water felt like they were being sort of overburdened compared to the folks who were over in England, and they wanted the laws changed. And there's that sort of theme playing out in the Book of Mormon. I'll also just note Alma chapter 51, verse 13. And it came to pass that when the men who were called kingmen had heard the Lamanites were coming down to battle against them, they were glad in their hearts, and they refused to take up arms. Now, what happens in the Revolutionary War? You're fighting against your own people, essentially. You're here in the Americas. They're there. They send over their military folks. What is the truth of Revolutionary War is that so many people stood on the sidelines going, I don't want to get involved in this. The king's my king, and you guys are fighting to be a free country, but I don't want to be involved. Well, Alma chapter 51 does that. And they refused to take up arms, for they were so wroth with the chief judge, which is the Americans and democracy, and also with the people of liberty, that they would not take up arms to defend their country. It's not just kingmen and freemen. He's playing on the very way in which all that unfolded, and he's taking those historical narratives that he would have been so familiar with, and they become part of the story.
That's very good. By the way, he doesn't look anything like John Jay. I don't know who I'm thinking of, but apparently that's William Morgan.
The Smith family were in New England from 1638, right? So they're before the Revolutionary War. They're 150 years. They're incredibly patriotic. They know their roots, and they feel indebted to the country, and feel very much like this republic, this democracy is worth fighting for. So it's just not unusual that this is turning up in the pages.
And are those the political events that you mentioned there?
Yep. So, and then wealth and gold and coinage. So one of the challenges of the Book of Mormon is that it's preoccupied with gold, because Europeans are preoccupied with gold in the old world and then into the new world. But the people of the Americas, they are not preoccupied with gold. They use it as decoration, but they're using completely different means of exchange And we see this because, when you look at archaeology and the ways that various civilizations in the Americas operated, they did so with barter, they did so with cacao beans, they did so with other forms of exchange. Gold was decoration, and they kind of were bemused when the conquistadors wanted all their gold. They're like, well, okay, but why? But it makes a big difference to Europeans. And the Book of Mormon is underpinned with the idea of gold and silver being a treasure, which it is for treasure seekers in Joseph Smith's time, not so much for people who are ancient Americans.
They do use gold as a decoration, though, don't they, in the Book of Mormon, along with Ziph, like of the temple?
Yeah. There's definitely that, but it's also a means of exchange, right? It's coinage. I recently went to the British Museum. They have a whole room dedicated to different coins of the whole world throughout its history, and of course, America is completely missing because they just didn't have any coinage.
Well, I hate to bring this up, and honestly, but the Book of Mormon doesn't actually say coin.
Okay.
Orson Pratt, in creating the headings to the chapter 11, Alma, I think so, wrote coins, but it doesn't actually say coins in it. It says C9, Cenums,
It does
all the
seem
different
like
names, right?
It does seem like that's the more rational way to understand what's going on there. I know the apologists go, like, it could just be whatever.
There's some kind of weight involved. There
Yes.
has to be some kind of weight involved. And I think what they're arguing is it doesn't say it has to be stamped like a coin.
Right. Or even or even shaped like a coin.
But regardless of whether it's stamped like a coin or not, it's definitely talking all about, in Alma 11, if I'm correct, the monetary system, and they go into detail so we can understand how much Zeezrom is going to be offering Amulek to deny the existence of God, right? That's the whole point of this digression. Am I right, Ganesh?
That's absolutely correct. So, put it in so that you can solve the problem. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so I see what you're saying is that the Book of Mormon presents ancient Native Americans as using gold and silver as a medium of exchange, as opposed to exclusively, if they used it at all, it'd be for decorative purposes because they didn't attach value to it the way Europeans do. Is that right?
Correct. There's a lot of wealth in they're digging up gold, and they're digging up, because there's all this wealth, and it's defined, wealth is defined as gold, silver, and precious things, and that's not how, gold and silver are used in the Americas.
Very good. And then finally, you have literacy.
Yeah, so this is something that John Lunwell has done a bit of work with, and and shown that the Book of Mormon is heavily dependent on a literary world, that everybody is literate, that they are conversing, transacting, doing commerce, writing to each other, of course, because there's a number of epistles in the Book of Mormon, and that everybody is fully literate. King Benjamin writes a speech down and sends it out. This is outside of normal convention, where only the very elite get to be literate, and especially not the case in the Americas, where there's barely any literacy whatsoever. So it's a really good tell that this is talking about a 19th century situation where pen and paper and printing presses abound, and information is really a big part of the society. It's not really got anything to do with any ancient American setting.
That really strikes me as problematic, especially so for some reason, this idea about the literacy, because it is so prevalent in the Book of Mormon, this widespread literacy, almost as widespread one might think of as in Joseph Smith's day. And of course, that day was not as like today, but still, it's not everybody can read. A lot of people couldn't read, but still there was a lot of widespread literacy. So apparently that's similar to the Book of Mormon. And the reason I know this is such a dagger to the Book of Mormon is the efforts of apologists to try and diminish the literacy of the Book of Mormon peoples by reinterpreting the passages that obviously show they're literate, or there's a bunch of them literate. I mean, King Benjamin gives a speech, he has it written down and passed out to the people. Why? To make paper airplanes? I don't think so. There's a high degree of literacy, but there wouldn't have been, presuming there was anything to read in the first place, like a written language, right? So you got problems upon problems.
And John Lonwell makes the case that, literacy is a huge advancement in societal technology, and so once you can, transact in such ways, there'll be just thousands and thousands of scraps of literacy everywhere, because it just makes things so much better. And so, even if only a tiny fraction of them even survive, we'd still have hundreds of thousands of examples of it.
Graffiti. And I'm not kidding. What's
Yeah.
going to what kind of writing is going to last longer than graffiti? In fact, what do we have from Rome? We got lots of writing, but we also have lots of graffiti from ancient Rome. So where is it? It's not there because there was no literacy.
Although in the Book of Mormon, the guy wrote with the finger of God on the wall. So
yes, and you know where you find that. I heard you talking about that because I listened to that show in preparation.
Graffiti in the Book of Mormon. Yeah,
it's in the Book of Daniel. You know that, right? It's the Book of Daniel. Mene, tekel, upharsin.
Yeah,
that's what's written on the wall.
And the other oddity of literacy in the Book of Mormon is that there's a real class nation distinction between literacy, right? The Nephites are literate, the Lamanites are illiterate, and this seems to show some superiority, but also some idea that the Native Americans are, they've been corrupted, they've lost their literacy, and that's part of the curse, and why they are savage. And the Nephites, with their literacy, are civilized and peaceable and and industrious.
Right, and vis-a-vis the Nephites versus the Zarahemla people, right?
Yeah,
the Mulekites.
Yes.
The literacy and the ability is associated with having records.
Correct.
And I suppose that makes some degree of sense. But the Mulekites have lost their records, so they can't read or write anymore. They just didn't practice.
Yeah. So these are just all examples of how much the Book of Mormon is a 19th century American environment, and particularly American environment, right? We're not talking about Canada. We're not talking about Mexico. We're not talking about, South America and any of its places there. This is heavily dependent on Joseph's location in Western New York, down to the political events that are happening in his neighborhood.
When you look at the Book of Mormon from all these different points of view, including yours, and you're looking at it from multiple points of view as well, but you can triangulate the heck out of the Book of Mormon because it fits in Joseph Smith's day, it fits in his neighborhood, and it fits in his experience. Everything about the Book of Mormon locates it right in Joseph Smith's backyard.
Yes, Rod Meldrum will be so happy with us.
Will he? Well, I'm glad. I'm glad to hear that because Rod seems like a really nice guy.
Yeah, well, look, the Hill Cumorah it's literally in Joseph's backyard. So this is he's looking out and he's seeing in his mind's eye all of these events. And as he's traveling back and forth from Harmony, Pennsylvania to Palmyra, and he's got all that time on the back of somebody's wagon while he's trekking through the country, thinking about how these mounds were formed, how the wars were fought, how the wine was grown, how everything, and finding the waters, the many waters from the Finger Lakes through to the Great Lakes that just absolutely turn up in the Book of Mormon as evidences that that's happening right there and there.
Very good. Oh,
Okay.
multiple endings. We're at 2
All right.
hours.
We're
We're
on
at 2
the
hours.
home street. We've got time for this.
Hang on a second. Bill is doing, I think it's charades. It sounds like,
So sorry. So here,
okay.
just really quick, we got 2 slides left. Phone number there is on the bottom of the screen if folks want to call in, 662-667-6667. I have the phone lines open. If you do want to come into the studio, you can do that as well. We'll take the first 3 of you that show up to do that, and we'll take your questions for Ganesh and RFM and myself at the conclusion here of Ganesh's presentation. So thank you.
Great. Please proceed.
So one of the things that I found as I was going through the Book of Mormon and, looking at Brent Metcalf's work, which is brilliant about Messiah priority, one of the things I think that we have got wrong is when Joseph and Oliver go to Fayette, New York. They go there. We know that they go there on the 1st of June, 1829. But up until, I think that when people have tried to date where in the dictation sequence he's at, they've got it wrong. I think that he's absolutely at the end of 4th Nephi. And the reason I say this is because 4th Nephi obviously it's a big rush. It's 300 years in one chapter. Why is this happen so quickly? And why have we gone from Jesus to the end, in record time? And it seems like it's been done in a rush to finish the Book of Mormon, because Joseph is going to leave Harmony, Pennsylvania. He thinks he's going to get to Fayette, New York. He's going to be able to recover the lost manuscript from Martin Harris. The Book of Mormon's done. Publish out. We've got the money. We'll go home. So he gets to Fayette, New York, and a few things happen. One is that the Whitmers, they're very excited about him, and they want him to tell the story, and they also want him to recount the manuscript. And so he's got this manuscript, and he's able to tell them all these things, and they've got questions. And the other tough thing that happens is he goes to Palmyra to see Martin Harris and try to recover the lost manuscript, because he feels like Martin must have been able to repent and get him the text, and he finds out he can't get it. So because the end of 4th Nephi chapter 1, because there's only one chapter that is that Ammoron hides the records up to the Lord, and this ends it, just ends it. So maybe there was never an idea of Moroni at this point in time. It was just the idea that their records are put into the hill by Ammoron, and then Joseph could retrieve them. This is an end. So but Joseph gets to Fayette. There's no manuscript. The Whitmers are asking him lots of questions about the text, and he doesn't have the answers, or at least these spark new questions for him. And so then he kind of has to talk about Mormon, and he's already talked about Mormon in 3rd Nephi chapter 5 as being this abridger. So actually just kind of reviving him at the end to kind of close it out again is actually not a bad idea. And he needs a bit of time to recover the lost manuscript. I think at this point,
like what Bill was theorizing. Remember that, Bill? That Joseph Smith was playing for time at the end to see if the 116 pages would be recovered. I hope you can hear me.
I can. Thank you. Sorry. I'm in the middle. So here's what I'm fascinated by, this Revolutionary War, Freeman, Kingman stuff. Yeah. And I'm just making a few notes so that I can go back and we can create an episode on this. And so I'm doing that. And I wanted to mute myself so you didn't hear me typing. But yes, Joseph Smith seems quite apparent that he is trying to create a window of time for the 116 pages to turn up. And it's sort of a last resort to go back around all the way to the beginning of the Book of Mormon and go, all right, time's up. I got to do something. So I'm going to publish, I'm going to create these 116 pages so I can publish the book. But there are several indicators. And we did that in the episode of, I think it's titled The Lost 116 Pages, where we talk about sort of that whole timeline. And I think if folks didn't watch that, I think it was a great episode. They should go back and see it, because I think you and I both had numerous insights there about that.
Can I suggest an insight I've had now? And I may be wrong, but I'll put it out there anyway, which is this. There is a theory out there that Joseph Smith, initially with the Book of Mormon, his idea was he's going to write some kind of fictionalized historical novel, and he's going to sell it and make some money. It's just going to be a work of fiction. And then later on, somewhere during it or after it or where it was, it changed. And now it's going to be scripture, right? And now it's going to be the basis of his new religion. I think that if this is all correct, and it looks like it could be, the fact that Joseph Smith refuses to reproduce the 116 pages and then goes through all of this effort to delay the retranslation, right, of different plates. We all know how complicated the story is. I don't think he would worry about that. I don't think he would bother. I don't think he would care if he came up with 116 pages that's different from the first 116 pages, except that from the beginning, he considered this to be the word of God. That cannot be different. Otherwise, his translation is out the window.
I would argue with that
Go ahead.
assessment. So what we find that happens when he gets to Fayette is that people get to read the manuscript that he's produced with Oliver Cowdery. And one of those people is Martin Harris. And Martin Harris is aghast because Martin Harris is a universalist and he believes that the Lord's going to save everybody. But the part that Joseph has translated and produced with Oliver Cowdery says things like hellfire and brimstone, lake of fire and breathing, right? And that's totally against Martin's understanding of what happens after you die. So in Doctrine and Covenants section 19, Joseph has a revelation for Martin to win him over. And the argument Joseph makes is that when it talks about eternal torment and endless punishment, that those are names of God, and those things are just being used as scare tactics by God to make people repent. That hell is not eternal.
Wow.
And so,
not that I didn't know, of course, that's there, but if you contextualize that and say he's trying to pander to Martin Harris and his universalistic leanings, that's interesting.
Which suggests that the lost manuscript was different to what he's produced with Oliver. And
more
Martin
universalistic.
Harris, yeah. I think that, after he's lost the manuscript, he's lost his child, and he's kicked out of the Methodist Church by Emma's family, that he has his dark night of the soul. Like he has to come to terms with the fact that he's either got to change his mindset, or this Book of Mormon thing's not going to come off. And I think he makes maybe a promise, maybe even has a conversion experience where he dedicates the text to God and saving people. And that's why the part that he writes with Oliver Cowdery is more spiritual, more attuned to pointing people towards God and making a conversion than probably the part that he wrote and composed with Martin Harris.
It's really interesting that revelation that he gets has the effect of God not just saying, anytime from henceforth that I talk about eternal punishment, I'm just kidding. It's really not eternal. It's going to hurt a little, but it's not going to last forever. And the same thing with eternal torment, right? And endless torment. And what the revelation tells us is, no, it doesn't last forever. My name's God. I also have a couple other names, and one of them's endless and one of them's eternal. So eternal torment, that's my torment. Endless torment, that's my torment. Doesn't mean it's going to last forever, because it's not. But it also has the retroactive effect of taking every passage that is not universalistic and is very binary, one heaven, one hell, right? forever, and a lens that you can use to make them all universalist. Because God isn't really meaning what he says.
In that same section, that same Revelation, Doctrine and Covenants 19, God threatens Martin to put up the money for the publishing of the Book of Mormon. So there's a big incentive to get Martin on board, and also threaten him to actually follow through with his original promise.
Can I just say once again, my appreciation for Joseph Smith is increased because he's got to herd cats. And the more people that join his church, the more cats he has to herd. He has to appeal, at least to some degree, to their most deep-seated religious sentiments. And these people have deep-seated religious sentiments. So he's got to cater over here to somebody, cater over here. Emma, you don't like the guy spitting the tobacco on the floor in the School of Prophets, so you got to clean up. Okay, God's against it too. He's got to cater to so many people. He can't say yes to everybody, right? Because it would be impossible.
Yeah.
But I think he says yes to as many people as he can while still promoting his own vision. Just amazing balancing act. He's like the guy spinning the plates.
Yeah. And he's got to say yes to the people who are financing it, right? Who are putting up the money.
And David Whitmer was very concerned that he was beholden to Sidney Rigdon to the point where he catered to Sidney Rigdon and allowed Sidney Rigdon to influence the doctrine of the church in a number of respects.
Yeah, Joseph is, he's spinning plates.
Were there more here? There are more. Look at these.
Oh, yeah, sorry. So go back just a slide. I'll just talk about that Mormon one first. So Mormon 7 is another ending. It's where Mormon,
I thought you'd gotten to this one. I apologize.
Right, yeah. And then go to the next slide there.
Okay.
And then we have Mormon 8 and 9 where Moroni ends, right? And the interesting thing about this is, of course, Moroni says, I don't have any more ore. This is the end. This is
really it. This isn't even a question. This is the end of the Book of Mormon. Done. Finny.
Done. But of course, what the problem with that is that the Whitmers are listening to the manuscript. They're reading it out there, and they're asking questions. And one of the questions they're asking is, back in Mosiah, it talks about this record of scripture from the Jaredites, and it was promised that they're going to come forth. Where is this? And so Joseph is like, oh my gosh, okay, I'll add in some information.
When you say that, you're just hypothesizing that.
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
Yes.
Right, because there is an end, and he hasn't produced what he promised earlier in the Book of Mormon.
Yes, that's right. So, and somebody's pointed out to him, and so he has to go through it. So he does it again. So he produces Ether 1 to 5, and then he ends with Moroni in Ether chapter 5, saying basically, there's some witnesses, and you'll know that this is true. Amen. So that ends again in Ether 5. And then he's like, and then maybe it's a stall. Maybe he's gone back and forth to Martin Harris's and it's still not coming up. And maybe Martin's asked him for extra time. And so, and the Whitmers are all in the house. They're asking him questions. And so he writes more of Ether. And then it ends again at Ether 12 with another, ending from Moroni, where he talks about the weaknesses of the text. And I think that this is particularly at the same time in June of 1829 as this is being written in Ether chapter 12, and this points to what you were asking before, Bill, is that we know that the extended family, because we've got a letter from Uncle Jesse to Hiram Smith. Uncle Jesse is basically saying, this is the work of the devil. You are engaging in something terrible, Joseph, you need to repent. And the Book of Mormon in Ether chapter 12 becomes a bit of its own apologetics with the idea of the weaknesses of men, and that those people who are condemning it are going to not get God's grace, and this all happens.
Mock, but they shall mourn.
Yes,
that's in Ether 12.
Ether 12.
And my grace
And
is
the-
sufficient for the meek.
Yeah. And so I think that's directly related to these letters back and forth between the Smith extended family, questioning Joseph's veracity. And then he manages to write a little bit more, and Ether 15 finishes again and says, these last words are written by Ether, and this is the end. Amen. And Moroni is then exerted later, and when you talk to Brent Metcalf recently, he said, and we've had a chat about this, that Moroni seems like it's added much later. It's not just after Ether. It seems like it's after the replacement text, because the Book of Moroni is kind of like the first handbook of the church.
Right. It's like the Articles and Covenants. This is how you perform the ordinances.
Correct. So, and Joseph is just kind of adding new, additional information, and and basically finishing off the idea that this work is going to actually turn into a church, which I don't think he has that quite at the beginning of the replacement text. But the fact that he's in the Whitmer home and they're really excited about it and they want to do something about this, he's given the charge to Oliver Cowdery and David Whitmer in Doctrine and Covenants section 18 to form a church, and Oliver goes away and does his own Articles of Covenants where he gets a revelation. Brent Metcalf is doing some work on that, which is very exciting. In the name of God, so Oliver is actually getting revelation at this point in the piece, and these Moroni chapters are this handbook. This is how we're going to start the church. This is what it's going to look like. This is how we're going to do the ordinances.
For the audience, Ganesh and I both said Articles and Covenants. That was the official or unofficial nickname for what is now Section 20 in the Doctrine and Covenants. It's the Articles and Covenants of the church. It's the first handbook, right? And
yeah, it's like the Constitution of the church, really.
I thought that was 45 or 42.
Oh, sorry, you were right. Yeah, that's correct.
And I can't remember which one. One of them was the law of the church, 42 or 45, and the other one's the Constitution of the church. I can never keep them straight, but I can keep the Articles and Covenants straight. So, and that's where you have all the different things. This is how you baptize. This is what you say. This is how you bless the sacrament, both the bread and the water. Except in the Book of Mormon, you have the same thing in Moroni, except it's the bread and the wine. You also have the baptism, and it's like, who the hell is Moroni writing this for? He's the last guy.
He's the last guy. There's no church.
There's nobody else around. And he's writing down how you perform baptisms. Why is this even on his horizon? Why is he even thinking about this? Well,
and he corrects Jesus, because Jesus never talks about the laying on of hands for the gift of the Holy Ghost, but Moroni.
Oh, right. He says, yes. And by the way, I'm going to let you in on this thing that happened back in 3rd Nephi, but it didn't get written down. Even though Jesus was upbraiding him about writing all the stuff down, this didn't get written down. And I want to let you know that, that's interesting. The Book of Mormon actually does go back and amend itself.
Yeah, there are a number of times it does that. And those are really interesting too, because it shows that there's a development in the theology as the text goes on, which is, again, it confirms Mosiah priority. And,
well, it's so interesting because this is in the Book of Mormon, and you get to a point where, oh my gosh, we got a development. And so I want that development to be earlier on. So I'm going to plug it back earlier on by a flashback text being talked about, that this is what Jesus said. It's not in 3rd Nephi, but I'm telling you now, okay? Even though it's not exactly clear how it is he knows him, because it's not in 3rd Nephi, but he knows it somehow. So he's going to include it. And this is how Joseph Smith lived his life. Not just translating a book and doing this, but in his life. There would be a doctrinal development, and he would want to backdate it to give it greater authority. I'm not saying every time. A lot of times. Think the first vision. Think all sorts of things. Think the priesthood, restoration. And what he does is he comes up with a new story that answers the doctrinal innovation that he wants to support. And then he sticks it back in time And people like David Whitmer are going, what are you talking about? You never mentioned this before. But everybody else goes along with it. Everybody else that we know of goes along with the gaslighting. What are you talking about? He even says it. Okay, here's the thing. I'm sorry. I'm getting on my soapbox. I hope we don't have any callers. Joseph Smith even says it in the King Follett Discourse. When he says, I have taught for 14 years that God is a separate being, Jesus is a separate being, and the Holy Ghost is separate. It might be the Sermon at the Grove. It's 1844. I've taught this for the last 14 years. Well, in 1833, he wasn't teaching that because we've got the the lectures on faith, specifically lecture number 5, which doesn't define God like that. There's 2 beings in the Godhead in 1833. He is right there doing in black and white what it is I'm alleging, that he's taking a current belief and he's backdating it to the beginning, even though the historical record shows that that's not true. Boom. Done.
Mic drop.
Yeah, it was a pin, but I don't have a mic. If I drop this mic, it would make a lot of noise.
Yeah, so look, these endings to the Book of Mormon, they just tell us that things are evolving as they go, and Joseph is pivoting. He's flexible. He's innovative. He's able to insert into the text the answers to the questions that the people around him are asking, and even some of the criticisms, address some of the criticisms, that are coming up as he's, showing this to the people around him. So it's clever, it's amazing, and it's it's dynamic. That's why it kind of captures us all at some level.
Very good. So were those your conclusions, or did you have some more?
No, well, gosh, I think we've covered a lot, and it's there's a lot in there, and there's more. Obviously, Bill's busy, gathering more information because there's just so many of these little things.
I'll just say, there's no doubt this will be an episode in the next month, RFM. I just found so much stuff, and again, it's inappropriate, right? We're having one guest on, but he sent me down a rabbit hole, and I didn't want to get away from it and go oh, I forgot I was going to do that and never get to it. I had to make some notes, and what I found was insane. So Ganesh, you're right. In a few weeks, there will be an episode thanks to some things that we talked about tonight. So thank you.
Did you get that thing in there that I said about 14 years?
No, you'll have to make a note of that, please.
Okay, I'll make a note of that one right now. 14 years.
Pay more attention. Ganesh, by the way, I just want to say thank you. When you first started the show, the Mad Libs, mind-blowing to me. Mind-blowing. Other things along the way, too. There were a few things where I'm like, I don't know if I think that's as strong as he does. But the Mad Libs were insanely strong. And there were other parts later on in the show where I also thought there were strong connections to Joseph Smith being the author. And I just think your work, you reading the Book of Mormon and catching these things and being determined to go through it and find examples of this kind of stuff, phenomenal. Kudos to you, my friend.
You're absolutely brilliant. Believe it or not, this is a quarter of the insights that Ganesh had from going through the Book of Mormon this past year. Quarter max. And we had to limit it and then limit it some more because I said, this is going to go so long because it's such great stuff. And here we are at almost 2.5 hours.
And look, I've got to pay homage to some incredible people. William Davis, he served a mission in New Zealand and the same mission I did. So we talk, Brent Metcalf, another New Zealander, Kiwi. So we talk. Dan Vogel's work, incredible and amazing. And so really, they set me up to be able to see these things in ways that I hadn't seen before. And, just going through the exercise of reading the Book of Mormon with that mindset, you see things that you hadn't ever seen before.
Humbly said. Nevertheless, I say you are brilliant. Are there any people who've called in, Bill, that want to ask questions of Ganesh?
I have 2 calls So we'll go to the first one. First one's a regular, Simona. So Simona, are you there?
Yes, I am.
All right. How did you feel? How'd you like tonight's show?
It's very interesting.
Yeah.
And especially when you, at the end, you summarize why there might be the evidence why the Book of Mormon is a product of the 19th century environment. But I also want to add that it's also a product of the South American history of the natives. Because you mentioned even in previous shows that Joseph Smith, he loved the play Pizarro, then even some of the leaders were involved in the play. So that means that he liked that play, and the play was made based on Pizarro, who was a conquistador, conquered the Incas, in South America. And so he probably knew about it. And the other thing is, if you talk to people in South America, you will ask them why they immediately believe in the Book of Mormon. It's because some of the stories about the creation of the Inca Empire, they are very similar to the stories of Lehi, how he arrived to the Americas. And so, and Nephi actually will be what in Peru will be known as Manco Capac. You see, so it seems to me that Joseph knew a lot about the history of the natives in South America, and the similarities on the characters of the like Nephi and Levi and his wife and all that. They're very similar to the ones in the history of Peru. The other thing is like similarities to them. He knew a lot about Pizarro. Yeah, Pizarro was known, as many Europeans, to be obsessed about gold. And like you mentioned, the natives really didn't care much about gold and silver. As a matter of fact, there is a story being told in history that the natives were amazed about why the Europeans were so obsessed about trying to get all the gold as they could. And it was because they believed that maybe the Europeans ate gold. So that's the only reason why they wanted so much. Because to them, to the natives, that was not really important. Like you say, they used it just to decorate the walls of their temple or for ornaments for themselves like that. So I think, to me, I will say it's not only, the Book of Mormon is not only a product of the 19th century. And I think another thing is the Native Americans here in America, I think maybe that's the reason why they did not feel very much comfortable with the history that Joseph Smith was portraying the Book of Mormon about the natives, because it did not reflect really their culture. Now, the idea of a great spirit, yeah, that's actually just very common in all of them. And also today, the Native Americans is really maybe the smallest group that has been joined the church, because still they don't believe. But if you know very well, the statistics shows that the greatest numbers of converts in the church actually come from Latin America, because they find very much similarities with the Book of Mormon. So I think that's
Simona,
what I wanted to say.
Simona, do you think that maybe part of that is because of, like Ganesh was talking about, reading the Book of Mormon from the point of view of the Lamanites and really identifying with that? And do you think that might play into that in South America, that identifying with the Lamanites?
Yes, that's another thing. I love. Yes, actually, you read part of it, like the pre-cultures before the Inca Empire. There are a lot of remains of ceramics that show two groups among them: the dark skin with the lighter skin. So I think that's where actually Joseph Smith got the idea. And even today, you can find in Peru, especially, you can find people that are very dark, Indians that are dark, but they don't have any African blood, So it seems that still there remains, they call it the descendants from the natives, actually, more direct descendants from the natives of from the old times, or, they are not mixed like most of us, like including myself. I am mix of European and native. So anyway, I really truly believe that Joseph got the idea, first of all, at the beginning to start the Book of Mormon, probably from the stories about how the Inca Empire was created. And his idea of Lamanites and Nephites, that's where it came from too.
Simona, did you
So,
have a question for Ganesh at all?
yes. I don't know. I would like to ask Ganesh if you ever tried to inquire about that, or try to learn more about the Peruvian history, because you can find a book, and actually I researched about Inca Garcilaso de la Vega, who he actually he's the one who wrote more about the history of Peru, because as we know, the only thing we have from the Peruvian culture, the history, we don't have any written language that we are known.
Yeah.
But because he was a son of an Inca princess and Spanish, and he was actually raised by his mother's family in his first 15 years. That's when he wrote the history of the indigenous, because they were just passing on by word of mouth. And that was published actually in the early 17th century, already in the United States. So that means that Joseph Smith had probably access, since he loved that kind of stuff, and he was a storyteller. I wouldn't be surprised, and he was very knowledgeable about that history. So anyway, there are so many details that makes me, that's the other reason too why I joined the church, because when I read the Book of Mormon, I say, oh, wow, this is so similar. And if you remember, in the 1980s, the Book of Mormon actually used to have an illustration of Jesus Christ.
Simona, are you calling
But
from
just
Peru?
let me finish.
Do you live in Peru?
No, I don't. No, I don't. And I'm telling you, that's the other thing. That's what they took, just to promote that, because, okay.
I haven't read those books on Peru, and but they sound fascinating. Because I am in New Zealand, I often the Polynesian people, Pacific Island people, have an affinity towards Hagoth and trace that storyline through to the Book of Mormon. They feel very connected to. So it's very common to and part of our makeup, right, to apply the scriptures to ourselves. So we often find really powerful connections because they're emotional connections.
Yeah, we're very anxious as a people to find tribes to belong to gain our identity across the board.
Thomas Murphy's done a lot of work in this area, and his stuff is just fascinating and incredible, and I love it. Even more so because he's really interested in the oral storytelling that does make its way through the narrative, and I think he provides a different way to look at the Book of Mormon and its historicity from a oral storytelling basis.
Yes, I would like to request all of you that maybe you dig more into it and see you can find more information about it.
Okay, thank you. Great idea. And thank you so much for your contribution. A lot of positive comments coming your way, Simona. Thanks again.
Thank you.
All
right. And next caller is, it says Chico. So we'll see if that, maybe Checo. Caller, what's the name?
Checo.
Okay, go ahead, my friend. You're on Mormonism Live.
Warp Factor 3.
Hey, thank you. Thank you, guys. Well, I joined the stream very late, but I'll rewatch the whole thing after.
Yeah.
And yeah, well, I'm actually calling from Peru. You asked the other lady.
Are you kidding? I knew it. I am such a psychic. I am tuned in tonight. I'm dialed up to 11.
I knew there was a Peruvian in our midst.
And everybody saw it.
I know.
Everybody saw this miracle occur.
Well, I wanted to ask a question about the Book of Mormon introduction, especially the part when they talk about American Indians. And the reason I wanted to ask the question is because every time I have talked to a U.S. citizen, they always call themselves Americans. But to people from other countries, they call us, in this case, American and something else. For instance, yeah, you're American, but you are South American. Or you're American, but you're Central American. We are Americans, you know? And I swear, I could buy a BMW if they gave me $1 for every time I've heard that argument.
That's because every time we say it, we're pledging our fealty to Amerigo Vespucci. He's the idol. He's the saint of the United States of America, Amerigo Vespucci. So we are Americans.
Okay.
Americans.
No, I don't know why it is. I do it all the time. I always say I'm an American. Do you say you're a Russian?
Of course, no, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that.
No. I know what you're saying. I'm kidding. Because that is a discrete territory. That's its own country, right? There is no country called America,
right.
Is what you're saying.
Yeah.
We own it all over here on this side of the hemisphere.
I find that fascinating too, because I'm outside the United States, and of course the church is prominent in the States, and of course the Book of Mormon produced in the United States. So, and it's very, as far as I can tell and reading it, it's very beholden to its location of dictation. And so, the church becomes very United States centric. The American exceptionalism that exhibits throughout the Book of Mormon is in a United States context, not a American context, American continent context. So, it's quite challenging, talking about America when actually the Americas are just as valid to be, labeled and the people labeled that way. So I get your frustration.
Or maybe it's just one of those things. I don't know, like Team America, right?
Right. But my question is oriented in that way because in the introduction it says American Indians, So I don't know if I'm wrong. I will appreciate if you guys correct me.
Oh, I think that would cover all of North, Central, and everything. The way it's used there is not United States specific. I think it's being used to cover pole to pole and everything in the Western Hemisphere in all the Americas.
Although if you were talking about the people in Canada, you'd say First Nations. That they call the.
Oh, what are we, Second Nations? What does that mean? Canada getting heirs. First Nations. No, that's Tell me.
No, I thought maybe that term was only applying to the Indians from the U.S. because you've seen all over the continent, like people from Peru, they'd say, "Oh yeah, look at all these Incan structures and things." Yeah, those were Lamanites, and we are Lamanites because we are Indians and dark, right? But you have people in Central America, like Guatemala and Mexico, saying the same thing, and people down in Bolivia, they're saying the same thing. So everybody's saying the same thing, So I was thinking maybe the term American Indian applied only to the Indians that actually lived in the U.S. territory, since you guys are like very nationalist, so to say. I don't know.
I would answer that by saying the Book of Mormon Lamanites are definitely United States Indian peoples, but during Joseph's lifetime, he kind of expanded his his identity of Lamanites to fill the whole of the continent. So I think that the reference in the introduction is it not only includes the American continent, but it includes the Pacific and the Polynesian people. In fact, the people in New Zealand that I live with, they see themselves as defined by that greater understanding of term American Indians, even though they're Polynesians.
And Chekhov, this hemispheric model that Ganesh is talking about is obviously what Joseph Smith had in mind. There's a land northward, there's a land southward, and there's a little narrow neck of land in between that connects them, right? Obviously what Joseph Smith had in
I
mind.
read that.
But it tells you everything you need to know about
Right.
the Book of Mormon and geography and how well it matches the land anywhere. That the two main factions, the Heartland model guys and the Mesoamerican guys, who are always fighting it out because they think they're the ones who figured out what the Book of Mormon geography really is. Neither of them uses the Isthmus of Panama as the narrow neck of land. Neither of them. Neither of them will use what is obvious. So that's how bad the geography in the Book of Mormon is at describing the geography in the Americas. Unless you just take it on its own terms and say it's the whole Western Hemisphere or a sizable portion.
Yeah, well, that's why I was asking, because that turns Moroni into a Superman, because he carried the plates all the way to Cumorah. I mean, crossing the whole continent, to my understanding.
Chekhov. He was very buff. You know where Moroni worked out, right? Gold's Gym.
Gold's Gym. He made a short little stop in Manti too.
Okay.
I'd like to work out at Gold's Gym too, especially with some real weights.
Yeah. Okay, guys. Well, that was my question. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks for calling in, Chekhov.
Yeah. Great day.
Yeah, but
he's from Peru. Did you know that?
You nailed it. You knew there was
we had two callers, only two. I asked the first one, something tells me, ask her if she's in Peru. Yeah. I asked her, she's not. The very next caller, the only other caller is in Peru. What are the odds of that? What are the odds?
Is there a teacher in the audience? Yes. You nailed it, though.
I should start my own religion. Everybody's
a Mormon miracle. It's a Mormon miracle.
And all the world wondered at the beast.
We've got one last caller. This one will have the ordinary name, I think, of Chad. Chad, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I'm gonna guess Chad is not a Peruvian. There's my prophecy. Chad,
but he might be dangling.
No, not that it's a contest, but I'm calling from Canada, actually.
Wow.
You just mentioned
international tonight.
Yeah, and yeah, I can concur that we use the term First Nations up here in the Great White North.
Is that only in Canada? I've heard it before. I didn't know it was just Canada. Is that true?
Well, I assume it's a universal term. You guys use the term Native Americans a lot, and I'm always thinking First Nations in my head.
Yeah. Okay. So but you're not a First Nationer.
I'm not. I am from Europe, or my family is.
Where in Europe? If it's Russia, I'm going to blow my mind right now.
But I could talk your ear off about Book of Mormon archaeology all day. I went down that rabbit hole. I gave up on it. I want to be a bit more brief here and talk about Doctrine and Covenants 19, I think you said it was, and what Joseph Smith said to Martin Harris.
Mm-hmm. Please go ahead.
So in the Book of Mormon, I can't remember where it is in the beginning, but like First Nephi, Second Nephi, it says, and they think that at last they shall be whipped with but a few stripes, and at last they shall be saved in the kingdom of heaven, or something.
Anti-universalist rhetoric, yes.
Exactly. So basically what Joseph Smith is telling Martin Harris is the exact opposite of this scripture. And so you visited this theme where the Book of Mormon amends itself. The Doctrine and Covenants is also amending the Book of Mormon. And I'd just like to point out that it's interesting how the Doctrine and Covenants needs to clarify the most correct book ever written.
Good point. Second Nephi 28.
Yeah, that's all I wanted to call about and mention, so I'll be brief here.
Interesting. Yep. It's not just the Bible, is it? It's the Book of Mormon. Had it been dictated by the point that Section 19 was received is my question now.
Yeah, we don't exactly know, I guess is the question. We don't know when. One of the interesting things about Joseph moving to to Fayette, New York, and then being closer to Palmyra, so he's going back and forth. He's doing a few things. We know for certain on the 12th of June, he is putting in the title page for the copyright for the Book of Mormon. So we know that particular date, but we don't know. Like I said earlier, I believe he moved to Fayette, New York, just after he wrote 4th Nephi chapter 1, and he was expecting to be reunited with lost manuscript and it all to be over, and that didn't happen. One of the interesting things
I'll go ahead and I will insert that the heading that the church has on Section 19 is sometime in the summer of 1829. So that's basically after the Book of Mormon was finished being dictated, which goes into June, but June 21st is when summer starts, right? Or June 22nd.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. One of the things I think that's fascinating is I think that the recovery of the brass plates that Nephi, Sam, Layman, and Lemuel do is probably a type set of Joseph and perhaps others of his brothers or heavies that are trying to press on Martin Harris to give up the lost manuscript, because I think at the time that he moves to Fayette, he thinks Martin is responsible, for this loss. He's the wicked man. He's going to recover them from it, and he's putting the heavies. And maybe he does exactly the same kinds of things that Laban account is. First kind of offering, trying to persuade him, offering him money. Martin Harris doesn't, comply, and so in his head, Joseph kills Martin Harris, and that becomes the fodder for the Book of Mormon, kind of lore about the recovery of the brass plates.
That's fascinating, because that explains why in the Book of Mormon, Laban's last words are, "Dear Jesus." True story.
Interesting potential overlap. By the way, I love that RFM. DEER, Jesus. That does make a little bit of sense too. So right at the right moment. Yeah,
it shows Joseph's frustration with Martin, and his desire to want to have him dead. That kind of imagining it and fantasizing about it in his head.
Cool.
Well, he's got to have him, but he hates his guts.
And he needs the brass plates, right? He needs the lost manuscript. So,
well, thank you, Chad. Thank you for the call.
Yes, thanks.
All right,
Chad.
thanks for taking my call. Have a great night. Great episode.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Wow, this has been great. Ganesh, thank you so much for blessing us with your knowledge, with your study. And it sounds like I'm being sarcastic, and it's just always the way I sound, and I apologize. That's a tough thing, being the way I am, is that it's hard for me to be taken seriously. So let me just be serious here. You have done an awful lot of study and an awful lot of work and awful lot of thinking about the Book of Mormon. And you have brought to me and to Bill and to lots of people in our audience new and profound insights from your work that you give to us gratis. So thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. And on behalf of the audience, thank you so much. Everybody, thank you for coming and watching us. We went a little bit long tonight. We're going to be cutting that back, but we're at 2 hours and 48 minutes. I think it's been worth it, and I hope you do too. So please join us next week on Wednesday, 6:20 p.m. for another episode of Mormonism Live. And join us Friday at 8 o'clock p.m. Mountain Time for Mormonism After Dark. You too, Ganesh, if you can be there. Thanks again, my friend. Talk to you later.
Take it easy.